will present her affidavit based on the evidence that she has gathered, and when she is finished presenting, the jurors they'll be able to ask questions, and when questions have been answered and asked, then the jury will go away and deliberate for our time, and then they'll come back. So, thank you.
Wonderful. We'll kick it off. So, it's not just Melissa that will be giving the evidence. Teresa and myself will give a bit as well. But you're right, Eileen, that Melissa is going to be giving the most of the evidence. So, the Sovereign Dáil Éireann Courts on Circuit, record number 22-11-11. The Irish Republican Brotherhood versus the Papal Bull Laudabilitor of 1155 and the Crown of Ireland Act 1542 and the Act of Union 1801. I, John Declan Flanagan, sovereign claimant in Éire of Ballybarra House, Doolin in the county of Clare, aged 18 years and upwards, make oath and affirm as follows. I am the chairman of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the organisation that was founded by James Stephens on March 17, 1858, that operates under its foregoing constitution, last updated on the 22nd of July 2022, with the ongoing objective of securing an independent Irish Republic free from the influence of corruption, control and rule of the Crown. I make this affidavit with full authority of the organisation and do so from facts within my own knowledge, save for otherwise appearing, and where so otherwise stated or appearing, I believe same to be true and accurate in every respect. The matter of the lawfulness of the Papal Bull Laudabilitor, the Crown of Ireland Act and the Act of Union 1801 are of exceptional public importance for the people of Ireland, and that the matter is suitable for hearing in the Sovereign Dáil Éireann Courts by way of a special sitting with jury, so that the stance of the people of Ireland in relation to these instruments can be promulgated. I have attached to my affidavit at Exhibit JDF1 a copy of the Crown of Ireland Act 1542 and a copy of the Act of Union 1801 at Exhibit JDF2. I say to the best of my knowledge, there is no copy of the Papal Bull Laudabilitor 1155 in existence today, but I have attached at Exhibit JDF material suggestive of its construct. I say that on the 24th of April 1916, the Provisional Government of the Irish Republic was constituted by the organisation of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. Public na Éireann. The Provisional Government of the Irish Republic to the people of Ireland. Irish men. Absolutely, Billy. Yep. All good. Public na Éireann. The Provisional Government of the Irish Republic to the people of Ireland. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which she receives her old tradition of nationhood. Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. Having organised and trained her manhood through her secret revolutionary organisation, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and through her open military organisations, the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizens' Army, having patiently perfected her discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal itself, she now seizes that moment, and supported by her exiled children in America and by gallant allies in Europe, but relying in the first on her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland, and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies to be sovereign and indefeasible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished the right, nor can it ever be extinguished except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times in the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms. Standing on that fundamental right and again asserting it in arms in the face of the world, we hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign, independent state. And we pledge our lives and the lives of our comrade in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to and hereby claims the allegiance of every Irish man and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunity to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all the children of the nation equally, and oblivious of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government, which have divided a minority from the majority in the past. Until our arms have brought the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government, representative of the whole people of Ireland, and elected by the suffrages of all her men and women. That provisional government, hereby constituted, will administer the civil and military affairs in trust for the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke upon our arms, and we pray that no man who serves the cause will honour it by cowardice, inhumanity, or rapine. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valour and discipline, and by the readiness of its children to sacrifice itself for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clarke, Sean McDermott, Thomas McDonough, P.H. Pearse, Eamon Cant, James Connolly, Joseph Plunkett.
John. Thank you.
Thomas J. Clarke, Sean McDermott, Thomas McDonough, P.H. Pearse, Eamon Cant, James Connolly and Joseph Plunkett were all members of the Military Council of the Supreme Council of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. Therefore, following the promulgation of the proclamation on Easter Monday, April 24, 1916, the powers and authority for a permanent, sovereign, independent government for the Irish Republic lay in trust within the organisation of the IRB for the people of Ireland, and said authority and powers being enshrined in the relevant articles of the foregoing constitution of the organisation, a copy of which I have attached at Exhibit JDF 4. On the 28th of December 1918, IRB Sinn Féin won an overwhelming victory in the one and only 32-county All-Ireland general election that was called on by the King of England. On the 21st of January 1919, the sovereign Dáil and the sovereign Dáil courts were established, and Ireland's right to a sovereign, independent government, free of influence, control and rule of the Crown, was firmly established under international law. In order to give full effect to the government, the then President of the IRB, Michael Collins, transferred the powers and authority for a sovereign, independent government for the Irish Republic from the IRB to Dáil, on condition that the Dáil follow the programme of the Brotherhood to the full letter of the law, and failing which the said powers and authority would revert automatically to the Supreme Council of the IRB. I say and believe, and I am so advised, that each and every year since 1919, on January 21st, the licence for the operation of Dáil and the licence for the operation of the Dáil courts is renewed and reissued by the President of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, as is their right and responsibility. The current President of the IRB, William James Maguire, better known to us all as Billy, has honoured this obligation during his tenure as President, and I have attached his witness statement in this regard at Exhibit JDF 5. I say and believe that the sovereign constitution of the Irish Republic is the constitution of the Republic of Ireland proclaimed in arms on Easter Monday, April 24, 1916, and established by the will of the people of Ireland on January 21, 1919. Advanced thereafter by Máire McSúbhna in January 1930 and printed in the United States of America for the government of the Republic of Ireland. And I've attached a copy of this at Exhibit JDF. Article 1 of that Constitution. The sovereignty of the nation is inalienable. It is therefore not within the competence of any generation of the people to surrender that sovereignty, which each generation holds in trust for the nation. The question of surrender of national independence may not be submitted to an electorate. Subject to that fundamental principle, it is hereby declared that all authority in Ireland, legislative, executive and judicial, and all powers of government are derived solely, under God, from the people of Ireland. These powers are inherent in the people alone by virtue of their sovereignty. They must be exercised in accordance with the principles of liberty, equality, and justice for all. Any legislation not in accordance with these principles is hereby declared to be null and void. Article 12. No alien shall be permitted to purchase or hold land in Ireland. In our 1916 proclamation, we referred to differences carefully fostered by an alien government, which have divided a minority from the majority in the past. I say that the Papal Bull Laudabiliter 1155, the Crown of Ireland Act 1542, and the Act of Union 1801 are instruments of the Crown, utilised by alien governments to hold and to plunder Ireland's lands and natural resources, and to restrict the freedoms of our people and to foster divisions. I say firmly that any purported powers gleaned from these three unlawful instruments by any alien government or Crown corporation cannot and do not transcend our 1916 proclamation, our 1919 Declaration of Independence, and our sovereign constitution. Three lawful documents that usurp all the unlawful instruments and any and all purported acts, statutes, and seals deriving any extension of powers therefrom. I say further that the Papal Bull, the Crown of Ireland Act, and the Act of Union can be equally described as prescribed legislation, not in accordance with the principles of the sovereign constitution of the Irish Republic, and are therefore declared to be null and void. While no man or woman can claim to fully understand God, it is understood by all men and women who believe in a Most High God that He or she is the creator of everything. I say that this is God's law. The universe is the portrayal of everything that is created under God's law, and I say that this is universal law. Nature pronounces the natural evolution and symbiotic relationship between all that has been created in the universe under God's law. I say that this is natural law. In summation of this point, I say that the Papal Bull Laudabiliter 1155, the Crown of Ireland Act 1542, and the Act of Union 1801 are unlawful instruments constructed by the collusion of men with the intent and purpose of corrupting, controlling, and ruling the people of Ireland, for to plunder the natural resources of this country for the benefit of alien governments and Crown corporation. These instruments are unnatural and they are anti-ethical to the laws and to the universe and God. Good people of the jury and respected justices, the Irish Republican Brotherhood is seeking your confirmation by way of a declaratory order that the aforementioned Papal Bull, Crown of Ireland Act and Act of Union, together with any and all laws, statutes, seals, are unlawful and unenforceable against the people of Ireland and the sovereign territory of Éireann. Thank you. I'll now pass you over to Melissa to bring it forward. I'll get you over there.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I, Melissa Kelly, sovereign claimant in area of Kilfenora, Woodlawn, Ballinasloe, County Galway, aged 18 and upwards, make oath and affirm as follows. I make this affidavit from facts within my own knowledge, save where otherwise stated or appearing, and where so otherwise stated or appearing, I believe the same to be true and accurate in every respect. In this affidavit, I will briefly explain the background of the three disputed legal instruments that form the basis of the colonisation of our native land, starting with the first Norman invasion under the supposed authority of the Papal Bull Laudabiliter 1155, followed by the Crown of Ireland Act in 1542, and culminating in the Act of the Union in 1800. In each section, I will examine these instruments by providing a brief history of the period and the circumstances of their inception, drawing from the historical documents, etc., which will be provided in my exhibit book. I will also examine the validity of these instruments using contemporaneous laws from the time period as far as is currently known. I will critique the instruments from a perspective of natural law and the elements of justice and fairness. Finally, where applicable, I will explore the current international laws and laws governing contracts that would be relevant to each. It will be made quite clear to the court in conclusion that all of these instruments, if they indeed existed, are void ab initio, and thus all acts, statutes and seals derived from these instruments are built on foundations of sand and are thus also by extension void. The papal bull law debilitor and subsequent Norman invasion marked the beginning of 800 years of near perpetual strife in Ireland, caused by the oppression and subjugation of the indigenous population and the almost continual pockets of resistance of the native Gaels to their cultural and political genocide. In almost every generation since 1155, there have been rebellions and uprisings, all of which were met with savage reprisals from the forces of the Crown. It is clear that they were all motivated by the fact that Irish nationalists have always known that there was never a lawful basis for these foreigners to take our lands, plunder our resources, criminalise our way of life and enslave our children. It will be clear to everyone, after examining the history outlined here, that the way of the colonialist was the way of deceit and trickery, forged documents and coerced contracts backed up by military might and the careful fostering of internal strife, using the Machiavellian divide and conquer practices that have been utilised by imperialists since ancient Rome. Plantations of favoured foreigners, engineered famines, cultural annihilation of existing customs and religion, and the penal law tactics of the tyrant masquerading as legitimate rule and prerogative. To quote Holmes in his excellent work, The Case of Ireland, stated from the 1850s, "From the commencement of their subjugation, the benefit and protection of English law was not communicated to the Irish, though they frequently desired to be admitted to that precarious privilege. The wish was counteracted by the English adventurers in order that their cruelty and injustice to the natives might be indulged without restraint. The Irish were reputed aliens and enemies in their native land. It was adjudged no felony to kill them in time of peace. The law did neither protect their life nor avenge their death. When Henry II had once secured a firm footing in Ireland, whatever compacts he may have formed either with his own haughty and licentious barons or with the native chieftains can never be justly viewed in any other light other than as elements of a domination destined to comprehend both colonist and native in one common dependence. The solemn engagements with the natives were sure to be violated whenever the violation appeared necessary or useful to the extension of dominion. And with respect to the political privileges, the proud invaders soon became the feeble and dependent race. Charters and parliaments were the Englishmen in Ireland, but precarious evidence of an unhallowed title to plunder and oppress. The insolent and rapacious foreigner was doomed eventually to feel, in common with the native, the humiliation with which he caused, first the instrument and finally the victim of conquest. The effects of this history are to be felt today, and still the tactics of the colonialists persist clandestinely. Our people are crippled with the type of post-colonial stress disorder that keep us fighting amongst ourselves and prevent us from stepping into the sovereignty that is our ancient birthright. That sovereignty was last proclaimed in arms in 1916, and not even the dark shadow of the Civil War and the disgrace of the subsequent puppet governments can erase it.
The Papal Bull 1155. Though no existing record of this bull is to be found today, Melissa has reproduced a purported text from O'Halloran's History of Ireland below. Adrian, Bishop, servant of the servants of God, to his dearest Son in Christ, the illustrious King of England, greeting and apostolical benediction. Full, laudably, and profitably hath your magnificence conceived the design of propagating your glorious renown on earth, and completing your reward of eternal happiness in heaven, while as a Catholic prince you are intent on enlarging the borders of the Church, teaching the truth about the Christian faith to the ignorant and rude, extirpating the roots of vice from the field of the Lord, and for the most convenient execution of this purpose, requiring the counsel and favour of the Apostolic See, in which the mature your deliberation, and the greater the discretion of your procedure, by so much the happier we trust shall be your progress, with the assistance of the Lord, as all things are used to come to a prosperous end and issue, which take their beginning from the ardour of faith and the love of religion. There is indeed no doubt but that Ireland and all the islands on which Christ the Son of Righteousness has shone, and which have received the doctrine of the Christian faith, though belonging to the jurisdiction of St. Peter and the Holy Roman Church, as your Excellency also doth acknowledge, and therefore we are more solicitous to propagate the righteous plantation of faith in this land, and the branch acceptable to God, as we have the secret conviction of conscience that this is more especially our bounden duty. You then, my dear son in Christ, have signified to us your desire to enter the island of Ireland, in order to reduce the people to obedience under the laws, and to extirpate the plants of vice, and that you are willing to pay from each house a yearly pension of 1 penny to St. Peter, and that you will preserve the rights of the churches of the land whole and inviolate. We therefore, with the grace and acceptance suited to your pious and laudable design, and favourably assenting to your petition, do hold it good and acceptable, that, for extending the borders of the church, restraining the progress of vice, for the correctness of manners and planting of virtue, the increase of religion, you enter this island, and execute therein whatever shall pertain to the honour of God and welfare of the land, and that the people of this land receive you honourably, and reverence you as their Lord, the rights of their churches still remaining sacred and inviolate, and saving to St. Peter the annual pension of 1 penny from every house. If then you be resolved to carry the design you have conceived into effectual execution, study to form this nation to virtue and manners, and labour by yourself and others, you should judge meet for this work, in faith, word, and life, that the church may be there adorned, that the religion of the Christian faith be planted and grow up, and that all things pertaining to the honour of God and salvation of souls be so ordered, that you may be entitled to the fullness of heavenly reward from God, and obtain a glorious renown on earth throughout all ages. Given at Rome in the year of salvation, 1156.
When considering the validity of this bull and the subsequent confirmation letter by Pope Alexander, several avenues must be explored. Firstly, there's the long-standing controversy over whether these bulls even existed or were, like many documents from this era, forgeries created for propaganda purposes. Secondly, if they did exist, what authority, if any, did the Holy See have to grant the island of Ireland to an invading king when it had a well-established native king system and its own native system of law? Next, we must examine the question of whether the provisions laid out in these supposed bulls were ever adhered to or attempted to be adhered to. Finally, even if we accept the existence and validity of these bulls, there are several actually attested bulls in the following centuries that would overturn the papal fiefdom allegedly granted to England by the two aforementioned popes. But before we do this, we must set the scene for the events and outline the principal actors in this saga. Pope Adrian IV was born Nicholas Breakspear circa 1100 in Hertfordshire, England. He is the only Englishman to ever have been pope. He was the head of the Catholic Church and ruler of the Papal States from the 4th of December 1154 to his death in 1159. The period when Adrian was elected the successor of St. Peter following the death of Anastasius IV was a time of considerable turmoil in Rome. King William of Sicily was in open hostility. The barons of Campania fought with each other, and the Pope was and raided the country in every direction, and even robbed the pilgrims on their way to the tombs of the apostles. The turbulent populace of Rome were in open revolt under the leadership of Arnold of Brescia. Adrian immediately laid the city under interdict and retired to Viterbo. Following submission by the Roman senators, the interdict was lifted and he returned to Rome. At which time Arnold escaped and was taken under the protection of the rebel barons of the northern Campania. He then proceeded to crown Frederick Barbarossa Holy Roman Emperor after a heated standoff over relative authority of the papacy and the Holy Roman Emperor, the result of which being the submission of Frederick. The coronation ceremony provoked a fierce battle between the imperial army and the Romans. The imperial army were victorious and most of the leaders captured by Frederick. and over 1,000 killed, but the citizens held the city, and with his troops falling ill with malaria and a seeming lack of interest in bringing the city under control, Frederick and his troops retreated, abandoning the Pope. At this point, Adrian had no choice but to flee the city and march with his entourage to Beneventum, where he remained until June 1156. It was during this time that John of Salisbury spent 3 months in his company and supposedly obtained the papal bull in question. John of Salisbury was born 1115 and died in 1118. He was a distinguished philosopher, historian, churchman, and scholar. He spent some years in the papal court in Rome and elsewhere under Pope Eugene III, after which he returned to England to act as secretary to Thibaut, Archbishop of Canterbury, during which time he was sent on many diplomatic missions to the Holy See, which was how he came into the sphere of Henry II and his Chancellor Thomas Becket, and with Pope Adrian. In his work Polycraticus, he writes, "I recollect a journey I once made to Apulia for the purpose of visiting His Holiness Pope Adrian IV. I stayed with him at Benventium for nearly 3 months. In Metallogicus, he states, at my solicitation, he gave and granted Hibernia to Henry II, the illustrious King of England, to hold by hereditary right, as his letter, which is extant to this day, testifies. For all islands of ancient right, according to the donation of Constantine, are said to belong to the Roman Church, which he founded. He also sent by me a ring of gold with the best of emeralds set therein, wherewith the investiture might be made for the governorship of Ireland. And that same ring was ordered to be, and still is, in the public treasury of the king. John and his mentor Thibaut were very much in favour of bringing the Irish Church under the control of the British Church. Indeed, there were many heated debates relating to this issue. It is very important to note also that the donation of Constantine is now known to be a forgery. In early 1157, William of Sicily, who Adrian had excommunicated, submitted to the Pope, and the Pope subsequently returned to Rome. He died in 1159 and was succeeded by Alexander II. In September 1156, the question of subduing Ireland and granting it to Henry's brother William was broached, but because it was not pleasing to Henry's mother, the expedition was put off to another time. Henry, then 22, had his hands full with domestic strife and rebellious barons in England with the Welsh, and with discontent and rebellion in his French dominions, and as such he could neither afford nor sustain militarily such a serious campaign. Henry II was born in Le Mans, Maine, in the Kingdom of France, and was King of England from 1154 until his death in 1189. He was the first king from the House of Plantagenet. He became actively involved by the age of 14 in the efforts of his mother Matilda, daughter of King Henry I, to claim the throne of England, then occupied by Stephen of Blois. Stephen agreed to a peace treaty, the Treaty of Winchester, after Henry's military expedition in 1853, which resulted in Henry inheriting the kingdom upon Stephen's death in the following year. Henry inherited a difficult situation in England, as much of the country had been badly ravaged during the Civil War, resulting from Stephen's usurpation of the throne. Henry had married Eleanor of Aquitaine in 1152. Eleanor had been previously married to Louis of France, with whom she had 2 daughters. Issues relating to their inheritance in the territory of Aquitaine and other territorial disputes in France caused relations between the 2 kings to be strained, to say the least. Henry did not make any use of Adrian's alleged bull for nearly 15 years after receiving it, by which time Adrian was dead, so it was necessary to apply to his successor, Pope Alexander, for confirmation. Alexander, bishop, servant of the servants of God, to his most dear son in Christ, the illustrious King of England, health and apostolical benediction, for as much as these things which have been on good reasons granted by our predecessors deserve to be confirmed in the fullest manner, and considering the grant of the dominion of the realm of Ireland by the venerable Pope Adrian, we pursuing his footsteps do ratify and confirm the same, reserving to St. Peter and to the Holy Roman Church, as well as England as in Ireland, the yearly pension of 1 penny from every house, provided that the abominations of the land being removed, that barbarous people, Christians only in name, may by your means be reformed, and their lives and conversions mended, so that the disordered church, thus being reduced to regular discipline, that nation may, in the name of Christians, be so in act and deed, given at Rome in the year of salvation 1172. At that time, Gaelic Ireland was made up of several kingdoms, with the High King claiming lordship over most of the other kings. In May 1169, Anglo-Norman mercenaries had landed in Ireland at the request of Diarmaid mac Murchadha, the deposed king of Leinster, who had sought their help in regaining his kingship. They achieved this within weeks and returned to their neighbouring kingdoms. And raided neighbouring kingdoms. The military action was sanctioned by King Henry. In return, Diarmaid had sworn loyalty to Henry and promised land to the Normans. But of course, under Brehon law, which was the law of the land at the time, it was not permitted for a chief to alienate territory for a time period longer than your own lifetime. From the case of Tánaiste, I quote, "Because he who hath land of the tenure and nature of Tánaistry hath not such an estate that he can alienate his land in perpetuity, but only during his life, and his estate is qualified like the estate of a parson or prebendary, so that the fee simple is in abeyance. The same is also true for any chiefs who did submit. Of course, this is largely irrelevant under native law because Diarmaid had been lawfully deposed." In 1170, there were further Norman landings led by the Earl of Pembroke, Richard Strongbow de Clare. They seized the important port towns of Dublin and Waterford, and Strongbow married Diarmaid's daughter Aoife in August 1170. By virtue of this marriage, when Diarmaid died the following year, Strongbow had succession rights under Anglo-Norman law, but not under Brehon law, where the kingship would have passed to the males in the family and be elected by the Derbhfín, as her brother Donal subsequently was. Donal was later killed in the Battle of Naas in 1175. Strongbow then claimed Leinster, which Diarmaid had promised to him in return for his military support, reclaiming the kingdom and as a dowry for his daughter's marriage. As a result of this usurpation, a coalition of most of the Irish kingdoms besieged Dublin, Waterford and Wexford, but the Normans managed to hold their territory. It is true that Rome had long been troubled by what they considered irregular practices in the Irish Church. Its organisational structure was still largely monastic rather than episcopal. The monasteries were more often answered to local Irish kings and nobles than to church officials. Many church offices were hereditary, which meant that church property was also inherited. The Irish were slow to adopt Gregorian reform. The Irish Church continued to observe Easter according to the old calendar, unlike the rest of Western Christianity, which changed their date following the Council of Nicaea, and the Irish Church did not adopt the Roman tonsure. There was also consternation from Rome towards the Irish marriage practices such as divorce and polygamy, which ironically under Roman canon law would have rendered Aoife illegitimate by virtue of her mother being Diarmaid's second wife. Supposedly armed with the papal bulls and accompanied by a large army, Henry, who had entered Ireland in October 1171 before actually receiving Alexander's confirmation, claiming the country on the authority of Adrian's bull, immediately summoned the principal clergy of Ireland to meet in conference at Cashel at what is now known as the Synod of Cashel. Here the two bulls were allegedly read, and in the name of the sovereign pontiff, the clergy and the people of Ireland were called upon to receive Henry II as their king. The synod was presided over by the papal legate, the primate of Ireland having refused to attend. No formal action was taken by this synod as a body following this, and according to James G. Maguire in his work Ireland and the Pope, published in 1888 in San Francisco, that they were read and that there were individual submissions of the clergy to King Henry in consequence is well attested. He goes on to state, Henry's only ostensible purpose in summoning the synod was to make a pretense of carrying out church reforms confided to him by the bulls, and his only real purpose was to secure on the strength of the bulls the submission of as many of the political and religious leaders of the country as possible. Henry granted Strongbow Leinster as a fiefdom and declared the North Irish towns, which had been settled in the time between William the Conqueror and this invasion, to be crown land. Many of the Irish kings submitted to him, likely in the hopes that this would stop Norman expansion, but Henry granted the unconquered kingdom of Meath to Hugh de Lacy. Henry left in 1172 and fighting continued between the Irish and Normans. In 1175, the Treaty of Windsor was signed between Henry and the Arthery of Ireland, Ruaidhrí Ó Conchobar. This treaty effectively amounted to a status quo antebellum, which meant both sides held the territory they held before the conflict. So the Normans held the Pale and O'Conchobar the rest of Ireland. There was also an agreement for fealty and nominal tithes to be paid in return for Henry preventing Norman expansion. The treaty was not honoured by Henry as the Norman knights continued to carve out new territories as they pleased, starting with assaults on Munster and Ulster in 1175. Henry was by now too preoccupied with events in France to even attempt to curb their pillaging, supposing he opposed it at all. In 1177, he declared his 10-year-old son John Lord of Ireland, again in direct contravention of the treaty he had signed. Prince John, commonly referred to at the time as John Lackland, because unlike his brothers, he had not been given a kingdom of his own. During marriage negotiations for this boy, when he was a young child, his lack of a kingdom caused issues for Henry, and thus at the age of 10 he was created Lord of Ireland. When this boy came of age in 1585, he mounted an expedition to Ireland where Henry intended to have him crowned king, but Pope Lucian III refused this request and he had to make do with the title Lord of Ireland. In general, this visit to his supposed dominion land was an abysmal failure, with John managing to insult and annoy even Gaelic chiefs and clergy predisposed towards the crown by his childish behaviour and lack of regal presence. He did not return to Ireland for many years. This series of events marked a watershed in Ireland's history, marking the beginning of more than 800 years of English and later British involvement in Ireland. Some of the most convincing arguments against the bull are to be found in the excellent rebuttal to the aforementioned work by James Maguire, Ireland and the Pope, titled The Pope in Ireland. He first draws on the writings of the Abbé MacGeoghegan from the opening chapter of his book History of Ireland, which dissects the history which Geraldus Gambrinus compiled by order of the king, in which he states, "The English, having in the 12th century put an end to the Irish monarchy and wishing to give a colour of justice to the usurpations and to the tyranny which they exercised against the inhabitants of that country, have without any other title than a fictitious bull of Adrian IV, the right of the strongest, represented the Irish as savages who inhabited the woods and who never obeyed the laws, as if these titles were sufficient for stripping them of their properties. What? That people so renowned in the first ages of Christianity for their piety and learning, and amongst whom the Anglo-Saxons themselves went, according to their own historians, to be instructed during the centuries which preceded the invasion of the English, are all of a sudden reduced to the condition of savages. This metamorphosis is too difficult to be admitted, and at the same time too obvious for us not to feel how absurd such an accusation must be. Given the reputation for learning and the evidence clear to be seen by the surviving illuminated manuscripts, such as the Book of Kells and the Book of Durrow, and the unbroken history of Christianity on our island from at least the 5th century, it is very difficult to argue with that position. It was the honourable testimony of Sir John Davies that there was no nation under the sun that did love equal and indifferent justice better than the Irish, or who would rest better satisfied with the execution thereof, although it were against themselves, so as they might have the protection and benefit of the law, and upon a just cause they did desire it. Sir Edward Coke, an English Chief Justice, loaded with law but not overburdened with liberality, also declared, there was no nation of the Christian world that were greater lovers of justice than the Irish, which virtue, he adds, must necessarily be accompanied by many others. Professor Martin A. Brennan, in the first volume of his Irish Antiquities, states that the chronicler Cambrensis, Gerald Barry, from whom the earliest historical record of this supposed bull is gleaned, was none other than the half-brother of King Henry's illegitimate children, the Fitzhenrys, and his family was closely allied with Dermot MacMorrough. In the most unflattering terms, which I will not repeat here but can be read in his book referenced in the citations, he casts very reasonable doubt on whether we can take this chronicler as an impartial witness to these two bulls. Never mentioned or produced until after MacMorrough had engaged Welsh mercenaries, including some from the chronicler's family, to wage a military campaign in Ireland that would have no justification whatsoever but for these alleged bulls. Another point in favour of the invalidity / non-existence of these bulls is that they were all allegedly sent from Rome, but at the time of their issue, neither Adrian nor Alexander was actually in residence in Rome. Adrian, as I discussed above, having been forced to retreat to Benventum because of the disquiet provoked by Frederick's coronation, and indeed John of Salisbury says as much in his quotation above. Alexander, at the time he supposedly issued his letter of confirmation, was in exile in Tusculum, as his other actually attested letters bulls make abundantly clear. The state of turbulence in Rome being such that he was unable to return until 1178. According to the author of Ireland and the Pope mentioned above, whilst the original record of Alexander's bull in Geraldus Cambrinus Expungia Hibernica, the very same author, in another work, De Principis Instructione, produced by the Anglican Society by a Mr. Brewer in 1846, states, "Some assert or imagine that this bull was obtained from the Pope, but others deny that it was ever obtained from the Pontiff." This is hardly a conclusive statement from the person on whose writings the existence of the bull hinges. That author further states that the archivist in the time of writing of the Vatican could find no record of either bull from the time they were supposedly issued. There were, however, preserved in the Barberini archives, in a series of papers relating to the pontificate of John XXIII, from approximately 1325, papers that assert that the Irish reject the validity of the supposed bulls. Quote, "Moreover, they assert that the King of England, under false pretences and by false bulls, obtained the dominion of Ireland, and this opinion is commonly held among them." Probably the most convincing point made in this work is that none of the other kings of the time made any mention of this very generous grant by Adrian and its confirmation by Alexander. No records found in their papers, and no letters or ambassadors dispatched to Rome to obtain similar grants for themselves. When one considers the bitter rivalries that were playing out between Henry and the King of France, for example, this is most unbelievable. That there is no criticism from any of Adrian's enemies is also bizarre. Even more so, the lack of criticism of Alexander's letter. It must be remembered that there was a bitter schism underway inside the church, with an anti-pope installed in Rome, with the backing of the Roman emperor, many cardinals, and many other European rulers. To think that this grant of the island of Ireland, the land of saints and scholars and the seat of monastic learning since the cradle of civilization, would not have been used as a political football against the popes and Henry by their rivals and bitter enemies is frankly absurd, given what we know about these characters and the times in which they lived. There is no record of these bulls to be found in any of the Irish annals at the time, not even in the chronicles of Maurice Regan, the chronicler for Morrow, the King of Leinster, who would have most reason to have noticed such an important development. Now let us consider the terms of the bull itself. There is no record that the arrested Peter Pence was ever paid to Rome from Ireland following the invasion, nor is there any record that Henry or his appointed bishops ever attempted to collect it. More strangely, there is no record of either pope ever remonstrating with Henry for his breach of contract in this manner, and there was ample opportunity with his country being put under papal interdict for the murder of Archbishop Becket, which marked the climax of controversy about the relative powers of church and king that had simmered away for approximately 10 years. Another point to ponder is how likely Alexander is to have felt predisposed to be granting Henry favours at this time. Henry eventually did public penance and the interdict was lifted in 1174, but in the period preceding this, the relationship between the Pope and the English king was strained, to say the least. It is my opinion, based on the preponderance of the available evidence, that these bulls were forgeries, but now I will examine their validity as if they did exist. First and foremost, the donation of Constantine, which is supposedly bestowed upon the pontiff, the right to grant territories, is now known to be a forgery. The Pope had no right, legally or morally, to give away land that was already populated by people. He had no right to impose foreign rule and foreign laws on the indigenous people of Ireland. If we are to believe the words of the bull, the Irish Church was not under the authority of Rome at the time, and indeed the Gaelic Church retained a large measure of autonomy following the divide after the Council of Nicaea, caused by their refusal to change the date of Easter and to adopt the Roman tonsure. That being said, there was serious progress being made by bishops to adopt somewhat the Gregorian reforms, as was evident by the recent Synod of Kells, which makes it quite unbelievable that the Pope would have chosen this time to rock the ecclesiastical boat, especially with the unrest he was facing throughout Christendom. Even the quite clearly prejudiced Edward Coke granted that if a king came to conquer a Christian kingdom, the existing laws of the land had to be followed. Therefore, Henry could not have lawfully interfered in the deposition of Diarmaid MacMorrow affair, contrary to the existing laws of the land, whether or not he had a papal blessing. He could also not accept submission from chiefs who held their territory under the Tánaiste system because submission was not theirs to give. There is confusion in the historical record as to whether the synod at which the bulls were supposedly held was in Cashel or in Waterford, but there is consistency in the assertion that the Primate of Ireland was not in attendance. Under canon law of the time, a synod without the Primate would not have constituted a valid synod. The Synod of Cashel was held before the Alexander Bull was written, and Waterford at this time was completely under Norman control and would not have been likely to have been attended by the native clergy. Lord Littleton, in his book History of Henry, Volume 5, page 67, says, "Upon the whole, therefore, this bull, like many before and since, was the mere effect of a league between papal and regal powers to abet and assist each other's usurpations. Nor is it easy to say whether more disturbance to the world and more iniquity have arisen from their acting conjointly, or from the opposition which the former has made to the latter. In this instance, the best, or indeed the sole excuse for the proceedings of either was the savage state of the Irish, to whom it might be beneficial to be conquered, and broken thereby salutary discipline of civil order and good laws. Henry's son John, when he was king, was facing severe difficulties and in desperate need of the Pope's approval in 1215. Granted dominion of the Kingdom of England and the Lordship of Ireland to the Pope, who ceremonially returned England but made no mention whatsoever of Ireland, nor did he ever refer to John by the title he had been granted by his father, Lord of Ireland. Another subsequent bull would clearly suggest that the colonialisation of a Christian people was against the papal doctrine, was issued in 1493. Pope Alexander VI issued a papal bull or decree inter caetera, in which he authorizes Spain and Portugal to colonize the Americas and its native people as subjects. The decree asserts the rights of Spain and Portugal to colonize, convert, and enslave, with this proviso, however, that none of the islands and mainlands found and to be found, discovered and to be discovered, beyond that said line towards the west and south, be in the actual position or possession of any Christian king or prince. In any event, even if all of the above was not the case, when Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church and was subsequently excommunicated, all his Catholic subjects, Irish or otherwise, were relieved of any oaths of fealty, and England's lordship over the supposed papal fiefdom of Ireland was dissolved forever. Pope Paul III announced the excommunication of Henry VIII of England from the Catholic Church in 1538 in Rome. This bull was actually written by the previous Pope Clement, but it had not been promulgated before his death and as such had to be reissued. This excommunication was repeated with his daughter Elizabeth with the bull Regnans in Excelsis, reigning on high. This was a papal bull that Pope Pius V issued on February 25th, 1570. This bull excommunicated Queen Elizabeth I of England, referring to her as the pretended Queen of England and the servant of crime. It declared her a heretic and released her subjects from allegiance to her, even those who had sworn oaths to her, and excommunicated anybody who obeyed her orders. We charge and command all and singular, the nobles, subjects, peoples, and others aforesaid, that they do not dare obey her orders, mandates, and laws. Those who shall act to the contrary, we include in the like sentence of excommunication. This was based on the authority of the Unam Sanctum, a papal bull that was issued by Pope Boniface VIII on 18th of November 1302. It laid down the dogmatic propositions on the unity of the Catholic Church, the necessity of belonging to it for eternal salvation. the position of the Pope as supreme head of the Church, and the duty thence arising of submission to the Pope to belong to the Church and thus attain salvation. The Pope further emphasised the higher position of the spiritual in comparison with the secular order. The bull was the definitive statement of the late medieval history of hierarchy, which argued for the temporal as well as the spiritual supremacy of the Pope. Obviously, this bull would suggest that the Vatican was well aware that the donation of Constantine was a fraudulent document, and that any other alleged bull claiming such authority from the Pope, such as Laudibiter, was either fraudulent or non-existent. Considering the words of the Council Fathers at Vatican II, whatever is opposed to life itself, such as any type of murder, genocide, abortion, euthanasia, or willful self-destruction, whatever violates the integrity of the human person, such as mutilation, torments inflicted on body or mind, attempts to coerce the will itself, whatever insults human dignity, such as subhuman living conditions, arbitrary imprisonment, deportation, slavery, prostitution, the selling of women and children, as well as the disgraceful working conditions where men are treated as mere tools for profit rather than as free and reasonable people. All of these things and others of their like are infamies indeed. They poison human society, but they do more harm to those who practice them than to those who suffer from the injury. Moreover, they are the supreme dishonour to the Creator. And considering what happened in Ireland subsequent to the supposed papal bull Laudibiter, it is past time that the Vatican clarify their position on whether this bull existed, and for the Holy See to repudiate it and its consequences, as Pope Francis has recently done in Canada when he apologised to the First Nations people for church involvement in the doctrine of discovery and the colonialisation of their lands. This brings us to our second disputed instrument, which was an act passed by the Parliament of Ireland on June 18, 1542, which created the title King of Ireland for Henry VIII of England and his successors, who had previously ruled the island as Lords of Ireland. The long title of this act was an act that the King of England, his heirs and successors, be Kings of Ireland. Firstly, I must briefly explain how this act came to be and outline the historical backdrop. As I mentioned above, it was in response to the excommunication of Henry VIII, which meant that he could no longer carry on the pretense of being ruler of a papal fiefdom, allegedly granted to his predecessor in 1155. Henry's split from Rome did not centre on religious differences, but on his personal life, namely his wife Catherine. Catherine was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, and the aunt of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, in addition to being the widow of Henry's brother Arthur. Increasingly concerned by his failure to produce a legitimate heir, although he publicly acknowledged an illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, and indeed looked into having this boy declared legitimate, Henry searched for a way to end his marriage in a manner consistent with his Catholic faith. That was necessary for political reasons, as a monarch violating Catholic doctrine risked disgrace and condemnation from the Pope. Henry was also, by all accounts, a fairly devout Catholic. He was a known opponent of the Protestant Reformation that was taking shape on the continent, earning the title Defender of the Faith from Pope Leo X for a treatise he wrote attacking Martin Luther. Henry sent emissaries to the Pope in the hopes of having his marriage annulled, and even prevailed upon Clement to establish an ecclesiastical court in England to rule on the matter. Clement, however, had no intention of nullifying the marriage. In addition to his doctrinal objections, he was more or less a prisoner of Charles V at the time, and he was powerless to stand in the way of Charles's insistence that the marriage stand. Already infatuated with Anne Boleyn, who was known to have taken a keen interest in Luther and the Reformation, Henry had exhausted his options for remarrying within the Church and decided excommunication was a fair price to pay for independence from the Pope and the potential of fathering an heir. Henry banished Catherine from his court and married Anne, secretly in 1532 and publicly in the following year. In doing so, he fundamentally altered the course of Christian and European history. To understand why Henry would take such a drastic course of action, a few points must be considered. Much is made of his infatuation with Anne Boleyn, but it was far from the only cause. Firstly, England by that time hadn't yet embraced the notion of a female ruler, and it was not considered a particularly viable option. Second, and perhaps more importantly, the Tudor hold on the crown was tenuous, having been taken in battle by his father in 1485 from Edward to mark the end of the War of the Roses between the houses of York and Plantagenet. He had a debatable claim to it through his mother Margaret Beaufort, but was by no means the strongest Plantagenet claimant. In a move which echoes the marriage of Strongbow and Aoife discussed above, he promptly married a daughter of the House of York. England at the time was a hotbed of superstition and intrigue, and the failure to be blessed with an abundance of male heirs was seen as a sign of God's displeasure, and there were any amount of other potentials eyeing the crown greedingly. The remaining Yorks, Plantagenets, not to mention the kings of Scotland and France. Henry would also be keenly aware, with the Civil War in living memory, that a king with a weak hold on his crown was in considerable danger. He was now being advised by a number of strong adherents to the new religion, and no doubt his head was turned by the immense wealth of the church at the time that was up for grabs. Subsequent to his remarriage, Henry issued a string of decrees that removed his kingdom from papal rule, ending the supremacy of the Catholic Church and creating the Church of England. Although the new church was at first extremely similar to Roman Catholicism, these moves made Henry and his successors absolute rulers who did not answer to the Pope. England joined a number of German states as well as Sweden in rejecting Catholicism, drawing battle lines for centuries of religious political and military conflict to follow, the ramifications of which were to be felt most keenly in Ireland. The secession of various European rulers during the Protestant Reformation, including Henry VIII, inspired the papacy to initiate the Counter-Reformation. One consequence of this was that the papacy required all Roman Catholic rulers to consider Protestant rulers and their loyal subjects as heretics, thus making their realms illegitimate under customary Roman Catholic international law. Consequently, the title King of Ireland was not initially recognised by Europe's Catholic monarchs and the papacy. Instead, they remained committed to considering Ireland a feudal fief of the papacy to be granted to any Catholic sovereign who managed to secure the island kingdom from the control of its Protestant monarchs. Meanwhile, in Ireland, many of the native Gaelic Irish had been expelled from various parts of the country, mainly the east and southeast, and replaced with English peasants and labourers. A large area to the east coast, extending from the Wicklow Mountains in the south to Dundalk in the north, covering parts of the modern counties of Dublin, Louth, Meath, Westmeath, Kildare, Offaly and Laois, became known as the Pale. Protected along much of its length by a ditch and rampart, the Pale was a defended area in which the English language and culture predominated and where English law was enforced by a government in Dublin. The Gaelic Irish were largely outside of English jurisdiction, maintaining their own language, social system, customs and laws. The English referred to them as His Majesty's Irish enemies. In legal terms, they had never been admitted as subjects to the crown. Ireland was not formally a realm, but rather a lordship. The title was assumed by the English monarch upon coronation. The rise of Gaelic influence resulted in the passing in 1366 of the Statutes of Kilkenny, which outlawed many social practices that had been developing apace. For example, intermarriage, the use of the Irish language, and Irish dress. In the 15th century, the Dublin government remained weak, owing principally to the War of the Roses. Beyond the Pale, the authority of the Dublin government was tenuous. The Hiberno-Norman lords had been able to carve out fiefdoms for themselves, but not to settle them with English tenants. As a result, in the 14th and 15th centuries, in the wake of Irish rebellion, Scottish invasion, the Black Death, and lack of interest on the part of the London government, the territories controlled by these lords achieved a high degree of independence. The Butlers, Fitzgeralds and Burkes raised their own armed forces, enforced their own law, and adopted Gaelic language and culture. Beyond those territories, large areas of land previously held by authority of the English crown were taken by the resurgent Gaelic Irish, particularly in the North and Midlands. By 1500, English monarchs had delegated government of Ireland to the most powerful of the Hiberno-Norman dynasties, the Fitzgeralds of Kildare. To keep the costs of running Ireland down and to protect the Pale, the King's Lord Deputy of Ireland was chief of the administration, based in Dublin Castle, but maintained no formal court and had a limited privy purse. The head of the Kildare Fitzgerald held the position of Lord Deputy until 1534. The problem was that the House of Kildare had become unreliable for the English monarch, scheming with Yorkist pretenders to the English throne, signing private treaties with foreign powers, and finally rebelling after the head of its hereditary rivals, the Butlers of Ormond, was awarded the position of Lord Deputy. The Reformation also led to growing tension between England and Ireland as Protestantism gained sway within England. Thomas, Earl of Kildare, a Catholic, offered control of Ireland to both the Pope and Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. Henry put down the rebellion by executing the leader, Silken Thomas Fitzgerald, along with several of his uncles, and imprisoned Garrett Oge, the head of the family. By now the king had to find a replacement for the Fitzgeralds to keep Ireland quiet. What was needed was a cost-effective new policy that protected the Pale and guaranteed the safety of England's vulnerable west flank from foreign invasions. With the assistance of Thomas Cromwell, the king implemented the policy of surrender and regrant. This extended royal protection to all of Ireland's elite without regard to ethnicity. In return, the whole country was expected to obey the law of the central government, and all Irish laws were to officially surrender their lands to the Crown and to receive them back in return by royal charter. The keystone to this reform was a statute passed in the Irish Parliament in 1541, whereby the lordship was converted to the Kingdom of Ireland. Surrender and regrant was the legal mechanism by which Irish lands were to be converted from a power structure rooted in clan and kin loyalties to a late feudal system under the English legal system. The policy was an attempt to incorporate the clan chiefs into the English-controlled Kingdom of Ireland, and to guarantee their property under English common law as distinct from the traditional Irish Brehon law system. This strategy was the primary non-violent method for the Crown officials in the Dublin Castle administration to subjugate Irish clan leaders during the conquest. It was an unanticipated consequence to be required to pay fealty in currency instead of trade labour or commodities. The process of surrender and regrant thus created new, unfamiliar debt structures amongst the Irish, and these debts had social and political consequences. The Gaelic Derb Fín elected kingship meant that Gaelic law clashed with surrender and regrant, as male relations as distantly related or as great-grandsons of former chiefs or kings were eligible to vote and to be elected to succeed as chief. Often this meant that several dozen men were eligible to be elected clan chief. This inevitably led to problems, since under the new policy it was possible for those individuals to become tenants of their chiefly cousin who had adopted surrender and regrant. Often the latter had an elected Taoiseach or deputy chief who was pushed aside as the next chief by the son of the chief under the system of primogeniture. That caused internal feuding, which was often exploited by English officials based in Dublin seeking to limit a clan's power or to take some or all of its land. That was the major cause of the ultimate failure in many cases of the policy of surrender and regrant. The tensions within clans and the new religious division between Catholics and Protestants from 1570, intrusions by grasping royal officials and lack of royal protection from continuing raids by other clans that had not accepted the new system, all made the policy frequently unworkable. It was an inclusive and imaginative attempt to stabilise the new Kingdom of Ireland and a tool for the English to destabilise and supplant Gaelic society, culture and customs with an English one, further weakening Irish power. The same divide and conquer tactics that we saw with the McMurrough affair were quite effective in some cases. Overall, the intention was to assimilate the Gaelic and Gaelicised upper classes and to develop a loyalty on their part to the new crown. To this end, they were granted English titles for the first time admitted to the Irish Parliament. One of the more important was the Earldom of Tyrone, which was created for the O'Neill dynasty in 1544. II. In a felicitous phrase, the king summed up his efforts at reform as politic drifts and amiable persuasions. This is sugarcoating his policy somewhat, as Henry tended to apply a carrot and stick policy, with his propensity to utilise bills of attainder against those not embracing his policies. An Act of Attainder was one of the most severe laws in England. It was reserved for what was considered the most serious crimes, frequently relating to treason. The term attainder comes from the Old French to condemn and is also referred to as a corruption of blood. Any and all rights of the person or group in question would be null and void. Once the act gained royal assent, the person or group would be found guilty without a trial and as such punished for their crimes by execution. However, death was not the only punishment of an attainder. You would also forfeit all property and any titles you held, which would be returned to the crown. The phrase corruption of blood referred to this, meaning property and titles were not then inherited by your family. This was a serious matter, as your treasonous actions not only impacted your own life, but ultimately impoverished your family. This practice was clearly against the law set out in the Magna Carta Hibernia of 1216, which clearly states, no free man shall be taken or imprisoned or disseized or outlawed or exiled or in any other wise destroyed, nor will we pass upon him nor send upon him but by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. We will sell no man, we will deny to no man or delay right or justice. In practice, lords around Ireland accepted their new privileges but carried on as they had before. In fact, it is debatable whether the ramifications of this agreement were explained or understood by the chiefs. For the Irish lordships, the English monarch was but another overlord similar to that found in the Gaelic system. It was, however, the Tudors' increased encroachment upon the local autonomy by the development of a centralised state that was to bring the English system into direct conflict with the Gaelic one. Henry's religious reformation, although not as thorough as in England, caused disquiet. His Lord Deputy Anthony St. Leger was largely able to buy off oppositions by granting lands confiscated from the monasteries to Irish nobles. The confiscation of church lands was again quite clearly in contravention of the Magna Carta Hibernia, which states, firstly, we have granted to God and by his present charter confirmed for us and our heirs forever that the Irish Church shall be free and have all of her rights entire and her liberties inviolable. The dissolution of religious houses in Ireland followed a very different course from those in England and Wales. There were about 400 religious houses in Ireland in 1530, many more relative to the population and material wealth than in England and Wales. In marked distinction to the situation in England, in Ireland, the houses of friars that flourished in the 15th century, attracting popular support and financial endowments, undertaking many ambitious building schemes and maintaining a regular conventional and spiritual life. They constituted around half the total number of religious houses. Irish monasteries, by contrast, had experienced a catastrophic decline in numbers, and by the 16th century it appears that only a minority maintained the daily religious observances of the divine office. Henry's direct authority as Lord of Ireland from 1541 as King of Ireland only extended to the area of the Pale immediately around Dublin. From the late 1530s, his administrators temporarily succeeded in persuading some clan chiefs to adopt his policy of surrender and regrant, including the adoption of the state religion. Nevertheless, Henry was determined to carry through a policy of dissolution in Ireland, and in 1537 introduced legislation into the Irish Parliament to legalise the closure of monasteries. The process faced considerable opposition and only 16 houses were suppressed. Henry remained resolute, however, and from 1541, as part of the Tudor conquest of Ireland, he continued to press for the areas of successful dissolution to be extended. For the most part, this involved making deals with local lords under which monastic property was granted away in exchange for oaths of allegiance to the new Irish crown. And consequently, Henry acquired little, if any, of the wealth of the Irish houses. By the time of Henry's death in 1547, around half of the Irish monastic houses had been suppressed. But many houses of friars continued to resist dissolution until well into the reign of Elizabeth I. At this point, it is necessary to explain briefly the nature of the so-called Irish Parliament and the manner in which they passed legislation. From this period of the original lordship in the 12th century onwards, Ireland has retained its own bicameral Parliament of Ireland, consisting of a House of Commons and a House of Lords. It was restricted for most of its existence in terms both of membership. Gaelic Irishmen were barred from the membership, and of powers, notably by Poyning's Law of 1494, which required the approval of the English Privy Council before any draft bills might be introduced to the Parliament. After 1541, Henry VIII admitted native Irish lords into both houses and recognised their land titles in return for their submission to him as King of Ireland. However, the real power in Ireland throughout this period lay not with Parliament, but with the Lord Deputy of Ireland, who was nominated by the King of England to govern Ireland. The Parliament met only when called by the Lord Deputy, when he wanted to pass new laws or raise new taxes. The Lord Deputy's permanent advisers were the Irish Privy Council. In other words, it was not a Parliament in the manner which modern readers would understand the term, merely a loyalist packed jury to whom English-made laws were read out in what was essentially a box-ticking exercise. A review of Mr. Grattan's answer to the Earl of Clare's speech 1800. Until 1782, the bonds of union between Great Britain and Ireland were the identity of the monarch, the influence of the Crown, and the initiative of the Privy Council. By the abrogation of the last, at the period I mentioned, the Parliament of Ireland acquired new rights and assumed a new position in the British Empire. The separate Parliament, brought to perfection by King James, which was held in check by the control of the Privy Council over its deliberations, it is only from the year 1782 that Ireland has had a Parliament, ailing and deliberating from within itself. What by a bold flight of imperialism we now denominate the Act of Annexation was in truth no more than an alteration of the royal style. Little did the framers of that act imagine that it was to be reputed the great bulwark of the title by which the Crown of England holds the sovereignty of this realm. It sets out that the King of England, using only the style of the Lord of Ireland, enjoyed nevertheless all kingly prerogatives. It prays in the name of Parliament and of the King's loving subjects that His Majesty will be pleased to assume the title of King of Ireland, and alleges as a motive that the Irishmen will be thereby rendered more obedient. The statute is anything but a limitation of the Irish crown to the monarchs of England, for it supposes the domination of Ireland to be already vested in them. Now, considering that we have already proven that the authority on which Henry's claim for dominion of Ireland is not and was never valid, it is peculiar indeed that now, after his excommunication removed even the pretense of lawful authority, he now reinforces this claim merely by making a decree presupposing the previous claim to be valid. And not only this, but he increases his territory by the characteristic two-pronged approach of surrender and re-grant and attainder land grabbing. At this point, I would like to draw attention to the papal bull Inter Caetera, issued by Alexander VI in 1493, which stated that a Christian nation could not establish dominion of a nation previously ruled by a Christian king and formed the basis of the law of nations. Considering that this bull is quoted to this day as the foundation of property rights in the United States and elsewhere, there can be no denying that it was binding international law, but was not and is not considered in the case of Ireland. This bull came to serve as the basis for the doctrine of discovery. We must also consider a subsequent papal declaration that occurred when Pope Paul III was presented with the news that some were claiming that indigenous Americans could be enslaved or deprived of their property because they were not Christians. He called it a lie perpetuated by Satan and issued Sublimis Deus in 1537, which begins by declaring unequivocally that God so loved the whole human race that he gave all people the ability to know him and to come to faith in him. It then responds directly to the claims, which were not present in any papal teachings, but put forward by those whose motives were other than evangelism, that the native people were subhuman and could be enslaved and their property stolen. We define and declare that notwithstanding whatever may have been said to the contrary, The said Indians and all other people who might later be discovered by Christians are by no means to be deprived of their liberty or the possession of their property, even though they be outside the faith of Jesus Christ, and that they may and should freely and legitimately enjoy their liberty and the possession of their property, nor should they be in any way enslaved should the contrary happen. It shall be null and have no effect. This declaration was made at the very same time that Henry was cementing his grip on areas beyond the Hiberno-Norman Pale, a region that he had hitherto no claim whatsoever upon. How can it be claimed that these embryonic international laws that colonialists subsequently successfully argued in common law jurisdictions justified the property rights in the New World and elsewhere should not have prevented the Tudor conquest of Gaelic lands and the subjugation and enslavement of a sovereign and Christianized people in contravention of the Treaty of Windsor and the Magna Carta Hibernia, as well as native laws and customs. After the King's death, successive Lords Deputy of Ireland have found that actually establishing the rule of central government was far more difficult than merely securing the Irish Lords' coerced pledges of allegiance. There were a few main reasons for the chronic violence that dogged the central government in Ireland. The first was some of the aggressive acts of the English administrators. In many instances, garrisons or seneschals disregarded the law and killed local chiefs and lords, sometimes even native-owned land. The second cause of the violence was the incompatibility of Gaelic Irish society with the English law and central government. In Irish law, the chief of a sept or clan was elected from a small noble lineage group called Derbfin. This often caused violence between rival candidates. However, under Henry VIII's settlement, succession was, as was the English custom, by inheritance of the firstborn son, which was intended to result in fewer disputes over inheritance, but also in an increased reduction in the distribution of landed wealth. Imposing this law forced the English to take sides in violent disputes within Irish lordship. Furthermore, important sections of Irish society had vested interest in opposing the English presence. They included the mercenary class and the poets or filla, both of whom faced having their sources of income and status abolished in English-ruled Ireland. Finally, it hardly needs to be stated, the native Irish were well aware that this foreign king, who had just created the Crown Corporation and proceeded to annex their native sovereign land into it, had absolutely no lawful right to do so. Now that we have set the scene, let's examine the Act itself. Please note that I have reproduced the spelling and wording of the Act for historical accuracy, though it's somewhat difficult to read. So I think because this has taken a lot longer than I expected it to, that you can just read this yourselves without it being read out, if you don't mind. It can clearly be seen here that in one fell swoop, and with no authority but his own, Henry granted himself the kingship of Ireland, of the island of Ireland, based on the supposition that it already belonged to him. Then in the very same act, he makes it high treason to disagree with his opinion of his ownership of the country. High treason punishable by death and attainder. Then he proclaimed it to a packed parliament of his own appointees to be passed. This unlawful act is still in force in the United Kingdom and was only nominally repealed in 1962 here. How could it be in keeping with the law? How could keeping this law on the statute books of Ireland, even if it was not based on imperialistic fraud and usurpation, possibly being in keeping with the Declaration of Ireland a republic? How could it possibly be consistent with the aims and provisions set out in Bunreath na Éireann? Another consequence of this act, which continues to this day, is the usurpation of our native heraldic symbol, the harp. When in 1534 Henry VIII formally rejected papal authority and subsequently declared himself King of Ireland in 1541, the upgrading of the constitutional status of Ireland from a lordship to a kingdom was marked by the appearance of the harp on their coinage, on the coinage of Ireland, effectively displacing the triple crown motif which had been the symbol of the lordship of Ireland. Reference to the harp as the arms of the King of Ireland can be found in one of the oldest medieval rolls of arms, the Wingembergen roll, a French roll of arms dating from 1280 and preserved in the Hague, Netherlands, attributed d'azur à la harpe d'or, English blue with a harp of gold, to the King of Ireland. The harp, traditionally associated with the biblical King David, was a rare charge on medieval rolls, and only 2 arms with the harp are listed in a collection of 19 early rolls. The idea of a harp being the arms of Ireland may have originated as a reference to a fictional character, Le Roi d'Ireland, in the courtly legend cycle of Tristan. Alternatively, it may have derived from a celebrated 13th century bardic poem, Taro Cúgam Cruat Mogriag, dedicated to Doncha Carbra O'Brien, a Gaelic king of Thomond. Whatever its origins, the harp was adopted, the symbol of the new Kingdom of Ireland, established by Henry VIII in 1841. A document in the office of the Ulster King of Arms from either the late reign of Henry VIII or the early reign of Edward VI states that they were the arms of the Kingdom of Ireland. The arms were incorporated into a unified royal coat of arms of England, Ireland, and Scotland upon the union of the crowns of the 3 kingdoms in 1603. Upon the secession of the Irish Free State from the United Kingdom in 1922, the harp was taken as the emblem of the independent Irish state. We are also left with the bizarre and totally fabricated story of the harp known as Brian Boru harp, which I will reproduce here from Nancy Hurl, a harp consultant at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and a member of the harp faculty of the Boston Conservatory of History, Ireland. After the death of Brian Boru in 1014, his 2 sons, Taigh and Doncha, jointly succeeded the throne. In 1023, Taigh was treacherously slain by Doncha, who then became High King of Ireland. By 1064, Doncha had been dethroned by his nephew, Tyr Back, son of Taigh. According to the story, Doncha had travelled to Rome to seek abolition from the Pope for murdering his brother. He brought with him the harp and gold crown of his late father, Brian Boru, and laid them at the feet of the Pope. The harp remained at the Vatican until the reign of Henry VIII, when the instrument, along with the title of Defender of Faith, was sent to the monarch. Henry gave the harp to the first Earl of Clanrickard, whose family kept it until the early 1700s, when a lady of the de Burgh family passed it to MacMahon of Clonagh, County Clare. After his death, it was bequeathed to Councillor McNamara of Limerick. In 1782, the harp was delivered by Chevalier Thomas O'Gorman to Colonel Burton Cunningham, who deposited it at Trinity College, where it remains to this day. The story, initially published in Charlotte Valencery's Collectanea de Rebus Hibernicus, was reprinted by Walker in the same year, but was deemed questionable, as the anecdotes were originally furnished by tradition and not apt to adhere strictly to the truth. In Bunting's 1840 volume, George Petrie's Memoir of an Ancient Irish Harp, preserved in Trinity College, charges that the story is a clumsy forgery fabricated by Chevalier Thomas O'Gorman to raise its antiquity and increase its historical interest. Eugene O'Curry suggests that O'Gorman did communicate the story to both Cunningham and Valancy. He probably did not invent it. Might there have been a mix-up with names, or could some parts of the story be true? O'Curry puts forward the possibility that when the harp was given to Clanrickard by Henry VIII, it was identified as the harp of Doncha Cabric O'Brien, the 6th in descent from the great hero of Clontarf. A misunderstanding occurred whereby the name became Doncha, son of Brian Boru, after which some persons generated a fictional legend. Walker and succeeding historians unanimously agreed that the carvings date the harp to the 14th century or early 15th century, and it bears similarities to the Queen Mary harp from the same period, held in the National Museum of Scotland. With this fabricated tale, we can see echoes of the fabled ring given to the previous Henry, and possibly also probably also fabricated laudabiliter investiture, and I have to assume that these fabrications had some symbolic meaning that I'm as yet not aware of. And considering Elizabeth I's obsession with getting rid of the native harpists and the connection between the biblical King David and the harp, this is something that needs to be explored and both the Vatican and the Crown should open their records for clarifications of their positions on this cultural usurpation. Okay, we'll just take a break for a second.
We want to take just 5 minutes, guys. Anybody want to make a time run or anything like that, yeah? Yeah, we'll pick up again.
The court will now resume.
The Act of the Union 1800. Before I examine the genesis of this Act and explore its lawfulness, I will briefly outline the important historical events in between the previous disputed legal document and this one. Plantations in 16th and 17th century Ireland involved the confiscation of Irish-owned land by the English Crown and the colonisation of the land with settlers from Great Britain. The Crown saw the plantations as a means of controlling, anglicising and civilising Gaelic Ireland. The main plantations took place from the 1550s to the 1620s, the biggest of which was the plantation of Ulster. The plantations led to the founding of many towns, massive demographic, cultural and economic changes in land ownership and the landscape, and also to centuries of ethnic and sectarian conflict. They took place before and during the earliest English colonisation of the Americas, and a group known as the West Countrymen were involved in both Irish and American colonisation. This is important to note because the methods, etc., were very similar. There had been small-scale immigration from Britain since the 12th century after the Anglo-Norman invasion. By the 15th century, direct English control had shrunk to an area called the Pale. In the 1540s, the English Tudor conquest of Ireland began. The first plantations were in the 1550s during the reign of Queen Mary I in Laois, Queen's Country, and Offaly, King's County. These plantations were based around existing frontier forts, but they were largely unsuccessful due to fierce resistance from the native Irish clans. The next plantations were during the reign of Elizabeth I. In 1586, there was an attempt to establish a corporate colony in Kerry-Currahee Barony, but it was destroyed by the Irish. In the 1570s, a privately funded plantation of East Ulster was attempted, but it also sparked conflict with the local Irish lords and ended in failure. The Munster plantation of the 1580s followed the Desmond rebellions. Businessmen were encouraged to invest in the scheme, and English colonists were settled on land confiscated from the defeated rebel lords. However, the settlements were scattered and attracted far fewer settlers than was hoped for. When the 9 Years' War broke out in 1590s, most of these settlements were abandoned, although English settlers began to return following the war. The plantation of Ulster began in the 1610s during the reign of James I. Following their defeat in the 9 Years' War, many rebel Ulster lords fled Ireland and their lands were confiscated. This was the biggest and most successful of the plantation and comprised of the province of Ulster. While the province was mainly Irish-speaking and Catholic, the new settlers were required to be English-speaking Protestants, with most coming from northern England and the Scottish lowlands. This created a distinct Ulster Protestant community. The process of Protestant ascendancy was facilitated and formalised in the legal system after 1691 by the passing of various penal laws which discriminated against the majority of the Irish Catholic population, long-standing fully Gaelicised and intermarried Norman families, example the de Burgos, Burkes, Fitzgeralds, Fitzmaurice dynasties, etc., having previously held immense power in Ireland, became major targets of the Crown and of the more stridently anti-Irish members of the ascendancy. With the defeat of Catholic attempts to regain power and lands in Ireland, a ruling class, which became later known as the Protestant Ascendancy, sought to ensure dominance with the passing of a number of laws to restrict the religious, political and economic activities of Catholics, and to some extent Protestant dissenters. These aspects provided the political basis for the new laws passed for several decades after 1695. Interdicts faced by Catholics and dissenters under the penal laws were, and I've written these here, but I'm not going to read them out because it's taking a little bit longer. However, the situation was confused by the policy of the Tory party in England and Ireland after 1688. They were Protestants who were generally supported the Catholic Jacobite claim and came to power briefly in London from 1710 to 1714. Also in 1750, the main Catholic Jacobite heir and claimant to the three thrones, Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, converted to Anglicanism for a time, but had reverted to Roman Catholicism again by his father's death in 1766. The son of James II, James Francis Edward Stuart, the Old Pretender, was recognised by the Holy See as the legitimate monarch of the Kingdom of England, Kingdom of Scotland and separate Kingdom of Ireland until his death in January 1766, and Roman Catholics were morally obliged to support him. This provided the main political excuse for the new laws, but it was not entirely exclusive, as there was no law against anyone converting to Protestantism. While a relatively small number of Catholics would convert to the Church of Ireland between the 17th and 19th century, more often than not, these conversions amounted to the alteration of paperwork rather than any change in religious beliefs or practices. With job prospects and civil rights for Irish Catholics having grown quite grim since the mid-17th century, for some, converting to the Anglican Church was one of the few ways one could attempt to improve their lots in life. A handful of members of formerly powerful Irish clans also chose to convert, learn English, swear fealty to the king, and perform roles on behalf of the Anglo-Irish of the Pale in exchange for their lands and other privileges. The confidence of the ascendancy was manifested towards the end of the 18th century by its adoption of a nationalist Irish, though still exclusively Protestant identity, and the formation in the 1770s of Henry Grattan's Patriot Party. The formation of the Irish Volunteers to defend Ireland from the French invasion during the American Revolution effectively gave Grattan a military force, and he was able to force Britain to concede a greater amount of self-rule to the ascendancy. Through the early 1780s, many corps of volunteers passed resolutions in favour of what they termed the more equal representation of the people. In 1789, the French Revolution began, and in 1793, France declared war against Britain. The ideas of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity and democracy, plus the religious link, were favoured by the Irish. And Ireland traditionally had been the back door to England. The Irish could see that religious inequality had been abolished in France and that a democratic government had been set up. Irish Catholics wanted equality. Irish Protestants wanted parliamentary reform. Both groups wanted economic reform. Many moderate Irish politicians wanted Catholic emancipation and parliamentary reform, but thought that Ireland should support England in the crisis and wanted to preserve the link with Britain. However, there were others who were more extreme in their views. Among those was Theobald Wolfe Tone and Lord Edward Fitzgerald, who formed the United Irishmen in 1792, which aimed at breaking the connection with England, asserting the independence of our country, uniting all Irishmen in place of the denominations of Protestants and Catholics. The organisation tried to unite dissenters and Irish Catholics against Anglican rule, and it grew rapidly. Pitt moved equally quickly. In 1793, the Irish Parliament was persuaded to pass the Catholic Relief Act, which gave Catholics the right to vote. Voters still had to be 40-shilling freeholders, and Roman Catholics, although they could stand as candidates, were not allowed to take a seat in Parliament. Catholic voters could realistically only vote for Protestants. Pitt's 1793 Act was only a part solution. In 1795, Earl Fitzwilliam was made Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. He was a Whig and an Irish absentee landlord who believed that Roman Catholics should have complete political equality. This he announced as a policy which raised hopes in Ireland, but Fitzwilliam was recalled within 3 months on the King's orders and in disgrace. After 1795, there were increasing incidents of sectarian violence in Ireland, exasperated by the attempts of the United Englishmen to enlist French help in their struggle to free Ireland from English control. The Protestants in Ireland formed the Orange Order, allegedly to safeguard Protestantism in Ireland, which merely escalated the problem. The now notorious Republican Wolfe Tone expressed disgust at the constitution won by the volunteers in Grattan's Parliament. In his argument on behalf of the Catholics of Ireland, he stated that the imaginary revolution of 1782 had failed to secure a representative and national government for Ireland because Protestants had refused to make common cause with Catholics. Ireland would continue to be governed by the exclusive interests of England and the landed ascendancy, so long as Irish Protestants remained illiberal, bigoted and blind. Calling themselves, at Tone's suggestion, the Society of the United Irishmen, the meeting resolved upon an equal representation of all the people in Parliament. In 1794, the Society of United Irishmen became a sworn association, using oaths that aimed at the overthrow of the Kingdom of Ireland. Given that France and Britain had been at war since 1793, administrating or making such oaths turned a reformist republican society that wanted to extend the franchise within the existing system into a republican revolutionary one. Tone spent some time in France attempting to raise support for Irish emancipation. Meanwhile, in Ireland, the membership of the United Irish had reached 300,000, about 6% of the population. But a vicious counter-insurgency campaign in 1797 weakened the organisation and forced the leadership to launch a rising without waiting for French help. The rebellion of 1798, led by United Irishmen, based on the principles of the French Revolution, was an attempt to achieve a democratic and equal Ireland. It was viciously resisted. Summarising his purpose, Tone declared to subvert the tyranny of our execrable government, to break the connection with England, the never-failing source of our political evils, and to assert the independence of my country. These were my objects: to unite the whole people of Ireland, to abolish the memory of all past dissensions, and to substitute the common name of Ireland in place of the denomination of Protestant, Catholic and Dissenter. These were my means. Yet he concluded that he despaired of Protestants, i.e. the Anglican ascendancy, for obvious reasons. They were already in possession of the whole power and patronage of the country. Following some initial successes, particularly in County Wexford, the uprising was suppressed by a government militia and yeomanry force, reinforced by units of the British Army, and a civilian and combatant death toll estimated between 10,000 and 50,000. A French expeditionary force landed in County Mayo in August in support of the rebels. Despite victory at Castlebar, they were eventually defeated. The aftermath of the rebellion led to the passing of the Acts of the Union in 1800, merging the Parliament of Ireland and the Parliament of the United Kingdom. Following the rebellion, Pitt believed that Ireland could not be allowed the luxury of an independent Parliament because the Irish might decide on an independent nation and make Ireland a base for England's enemies. Pitt therefore decided on an Act of the Union which would totally tie Ireland to Great Britain. Which brings us to our disputed instrument itself, which was a legislative agreement uniting Great Britain, England and Scotland, and Ireland under the name of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. Even today, the mere mention of this act evokes strong feelings in Ireland, and it remains a visible and potent symbol of some of the continued problems in the island. In many ways, the history of the past 200 years has been dominated by this measure and the various responses and reactions to it. Naturally, the Union met with strong resistance in the Irish Parliament, but the British government, by the undisguised purchase of votes either by cash or by bestowal of honours, secured a majority in both the British and Irish houses that carried the Union on March 28, 1800. The Act of the Union received the royal assent on August 1, 1800, and it came into effect on January 1, 1801. Henceforth, the monarchy was called the King of the United Kingdom in Great Britain and Ireland. Pitt intended to follow the Act of the Union with other more far-reaching reforms, including Catholic emancipation, but this was thwarted by George III, who refused to break his coronation oath to uphold the Anglican Church. The Act of the Union said that Ireland was to be joined to Great Britain into a single kingdom, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The Dublin Parliament was abolished. Ireland was to be represented at Westminster by 100 MPs, 4 Lords Spiritual and 28 Lords Temporal. All were Anglicans. The Anglican Church was to be recognised as the official Church of Ireland. There was to be free trade between Ireland and Britain. Ireland was to keep a separate exchequer and was to be responsible for 2/17 of the general expense of the United Kingdom. Ireland kept its own courts of justice and civil service. No Catholics were to be allowed to hold public office. There was to be no Catholic emancipation. Obviously, the anti-Catholic measures in this act were against the Magna Carta Hibernia provisions on religious freedom and all natural law principles of fairness and justice. Ruling Ireland direct from Westminster solved nothing. The Union was a political expedient in wartime, solving none of the grievances in Ireland over land, religion or politics. It had no social dimension at all. Ireland's economic problems were also ignored. The Act did increase the sense of grievance in Ireland, however. Pitt did not see the Act of the Union as a solution to the Irish problem. He knew that social and economic reforms were essential, as was Catholic emancipation. George III refused to allow full emancipation, so Pitt resigned in protest because he had intended to follow the Act of the Union with reforms. The Act became a liability rather than an asset. Peers holding Irish estates opposed concessions to Roman Catholics, as did the King, because of vested interests and religious bigotry. The threat to the status quo and potential violence, together with the patriotic zeal against Catholics, stopped full Catholic emancipation and ended all Pitt's intended reforms. Many questioned the legitimacy of the Act at the time. Henry Grattan Jr., in his Life of his Father, for example, which finally culminated in a poem that was soon taught in every school in Ireland. Why did they pass the Union? By perjury and fraud, by slaves who sold their land for gold, as Judas sold his God. Few disputed the younger Grattan's assertion that the Union had passed illegally and that it was an act of power and corruption. While judicious historians like W.E.H. Lecky denied the more extravagant claims, such as the allegation that Secret Service money had been used, there remained a consensus that the Irish Parliament had been infected and fatally undermined by what Lecky termed a virus of corruption. Again, like we discussed with the Crown of Ireland Act, it would be a fallacy to think the term Parliament meant what we might understand the term today. Most constituencies, both in boroughs and counties, had come to be, in practice, dominated by the interests of a small number of the great families, large landowners and wealthy individuals who secured the election of their own nominees. Few of the lawful electors were in a position to exercise a free choice at an election, even if they had wished to do so. In many boroughs, the lawful electors were extremely few in number. The days of popular politics in the modern sense had as yet not dawned, and most elections were decided by family connections, local interest and personal advantage. The effective electorate was often very small, and most of the members of Parliament themselves were in reality the nominees of a handful of peers or large landowners or the Crown. Edmund Burke lamented that the generality of peers, far from supporting themselves in a state of independent greatness, are but too apt to fall into oblivion of their proper dignity and run headlong into an abject servitude to the court. In Lords of the Ascendancy, F.G. James points out that an analysis of the family origins of the resident peers who attended the Dublin Parliament during the early 18th century, that almost all sprang from Anglo-Norman families established in Ireland before the era of the English Civil War. So in effect, what existed, far from being a parliament of a variety of Irish people, was in effect a cabal comprising of the descendants of the invasion, precipitated by our first illegitimate instrument, passing further legislation solidifying their hold on this stolen property. Surely anybody can see this is contrary to all notions of justice and fairness, in addition to the Magna Carta, Hibernia, and many other colonial laws. It is not possible to overstate the influence of the Dublin Castle administration's effect on the Irish Houses of Parliament. Its tactics included elevation to the peerage and promotion within the peerage. Dublin Castle also spied on the nobility in order to learn its political plans, while the Lords Lieutenant spent much time enjoying the pleasures of the great houses of the kingdom in an attempt to bind their nobility even closer to the crown. As James Kelly has written, the fact that the executive was neither controlled by nor answerable to the Parliament, a major constraint on the latter's power. As in Britain, the chief source of executive authority in Ireland was the royal prerogative. In Ireland, the King exercised these powers through the Lord Lieutenant, who was chosen by the Ministry in London. The Lord Lieutenant was responsible to the Ministry and not to the Irish Parliament. Therefore, neither House of the Irish Parliament had control over the Lord Lieutenant, who answered only to the London government. This was an extreme form of limitation upon the powers of both houses because it meant that the Irish executive could virtually ignore the displeasure of the Irish Parliament once sworn into office. The Lord Lieutenant held impressive powers. All civil and military and ecclesiastical appointments were in his gift. He also controlled huge patronage through his disposal of government offices, pensions and peerages. This control was basically used as a way to pack the Parliament, pass legislation and to punish dissent. It is more than clear that it was used liberally in the period they were trying to pass this act. In 1750, there were 115 Irish peerages. There were 150 in 1783 and 240 in 1801. Almost all promotion to and within the peerage came after a peer or member of the House of Commons had adhered to the Crown and its government for some significant period of time and in some difficult circumstances. Even after Poyning's law, which meant that the UK Parliament made laws for Ireland, was overturned with the renunciation of the Declaratory Act of 1782, bills continued to be submitted to the Privy Council in London for consideration by the English law lords to ensure their uniformity and compatibility with British legislation. If they were seen as objectionable, they were ordered to be amended or they were not returned to Dublin and so did not become law. This aside is important to note the wording of this renunciation of the Declaratory Act in light of what happened afterwards on the island. That the said rights claimed by the people of Ireland to be bound by laws enacted by His Majesty and the Parliament of that kingdom in all cases, whatever shall be and is hereby declared to be established and ascertained forever, and that at no time hereafter be questioned or questionable. This act had come about primarily as a result of the actions of the volunteers, local militias raised by local initiative in Ireland in 1778. Their original purpose was to guard against invasion and preserve law and order at a time when British soldiers were withdrawn from Ireland to fight abroad during the American Revolutionary War, and the government failed to organise its own militia. Taking advantage of Britain's preoccupation with its rebelling American colonies, the volunteers were able to pressure Westminster into conceding legislative independence to the Dublin Parliament. It was the volunteers of 1782 that launched a paramilitary tradition in Irish politics, a tradition, whether nationalist or unionist, has continued to shape Irish political activity with the ethos of the force of argument has been trumped by the argument of force. This act was obviously a serious motivator of the following Union Act, especially during the Regency crisis. In 1788, George III became seriously ill. This illness, referred to as madness, now identified as periphery, which caused blindness and senility, incapacitated the king for the period between October 1788 and February 1789. The king's many doctors or physicians could not explain this illness, which caused stories about his illness to spread among the populace. These stories had a negative effect on the populace, with the stock market falling 12%. This illness also meant that the Parliament could not proceed with any business because, according to the long-established law, the King had to deliver a speech at a state opening. So the Parliament was in a position of considerable difficulty. They could not convene a parliament to appoint a regent. Theoretically, the Lords Commissioners could open the Parliament, but no document could empower the Lords Commissioner to act unless the Great Seal of the realm was affixed to it. This seal could not be legally affixed without prior authorisation of the sovereign. Pitt and his fellow ministers ignored the last requirement and instructed the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal without the King's consent, as the act of affixing the Great Seal in itself gave legal force to the bill. This legal fiction was denounced by Edmund Burke as a forgery, a fraud, a glaring falsehood and a palpable absurdity. Nevertheless, others in Parliament felt that such a scheme was necessary to preserve an effective government. Consequently, on the 3rd of February 1789, more than 2 months after it had been convened, Parliament was formally opened by an illegal group of Lords Commissioners. The Regency Bill was introduced, but before it could be passed, the King recovered. An interesting conspiracy theory has been given credence in more recent times by significant levels of arsenic being found in this king's hair, which would have accounted for his symptoms and the convenient timing of his recovery and subsequent relapse. The King declared retroactively that the instrument authorising the Lords Commissioners to act was valid. Had he not recovered, Britain would have no lawful control of Ireland until he died, and it is debatable whether under the Declaratory Act a regent could have acted in his stead in any event. This might well have led to a very different history of Ireland had the Act of the Union not passed, given that King George had several relapses before his death and Britain was ruled by a regency from 1810 until his death 10 years later. Interestingly, the King had refused to pass a Regency Act during his lucid years and was very resistant to the notion because he had virtually disinherited his son who became his regent. This act was not passed until 1830. Another significant carrot employed by the British in securing the support of members of Parliament was the Order of St. Patrick, which was instituted in 1783 as another method for managing the members of the peerage. It was an added attraction and a mark of distinction, which many of the Irish peers saw as a very desirable award. There had been numerous measures employed to quell the lawful expression of dissent. The bill entitled An Act to Prevent Tumults and Disorders by Elections, Conventions or other unlawful assemblies under pretence of preparing or presenting public petitions or other addresses to His Majesty or the Parliament, had been introduced into the Parliament during the summer of 1783, and arguably its implementation and abuse is what fueled the formation and popularity of the United Irishmen. Here again, as with the Crown of Ireland debacle, we see an unlawful act presented to a packed Parliament with severe repercussions for dissenters entail. Robert Emmet stressed to the French that seeming Irish placidity when the Union was passed was only the silence of politics under a state of persecution. In 1803, he argued that Britain had taken even the name of independence from Ireland through the intervention of a parliament notoriously bribed and not representing the will of the people. The 1803 rising signalled that the Act of the Union, rather than resolving the Irish problems, was going to deepen them. This is why Emmet resonated so much across the 19th century. As long as the Act of the Union was in place, the challenge to it, so early in its life, posed a pivotal question for both Irish nationalism and British unionism. His speech from the dock after he was sentenced to death following his failed uprising is arguably one of the most moving speeches in Irish history. It eloquently disabuses the court and history of the British lie that his and previous rebellions were motivated by a desire to make Ireland a vassal of France rather than to gain sovereign independence for their native land.
I think, guys, before I read this, because we'll be breaking for lunch after it, I think Melissa deserves a round of applause. I am asked if I have anything to say why sentence of death should not be pronounced upon me. Was I to suffer only death after being adjudged guilty, I should bow in silence. But a man in my situation has not only to combat with the difficulties of fortune, but with the difficulties of prejudice, the sentence of a law which delivers over his body to the executioner, consigns his character to obloquy. The man dies, but the memory lives, and that mine may not forfeit all claim to the respect of my countrymen, I use this occasion to vindicate myself from some of the charges advanced against me. I am charged with being an emissary of France. 'Tis false. I am no emissary. I did not wish to deliver up my country to a foreign power, and least of all to France. No, never did I entertain the idea of establishing French power in Ireland. God forbid. On the contrary, it is evident from the introductory paragraph of the address of the Provisional Government that every hazard attending an independent effort was deemed preferable to the more fatal risk of introducing a French army into the country. Small would be our claims to patriotism and to sense, and palpable our affection of the love of liberty, if we were to encourage the profanation of our shores by a people who are slaves themselves, and the unprincipled and abandoned instruments of imposing slavery on others. If such an inference be drawn from any part of the proclamation of the Provisional Government, it culminates their views and is not warranted by the fact. How could they speak of freedom to their countrymen? How assume such an exalted motive and meditate the introduction of a power which has been the enemy of freedom in every part of the globe? Reviewing the conduct of France to other countries, could we expect better towards us? No. Let not then any man attaint my memory by believing that I could have hoped for freedom through the aid of France, and betrayed the sacred cause of liberty by committing it to the power of our most determined foe. Had I done so, I had not deserved to live, and dying with such a weight upon my character, I had merited the honest execration of that country which gave me birth, and to which I would have given freedom. Had I been in Switzerland, I would have fought against the French. In the dignity of freedom, I would have expired on the threshold of that country, and they should have entered it only by passing over my lifeless corpse. It is, then, to be supposed that I would be slow to make the same sacrifice to my native land. Am I, who lived but to be of service to my country, and who would object myself to the bondage of the grave to give her independence, am I to be loaded with the foul and grievous calumny of being an emissary of France? My lords, it may be part of the system of angry justice to bow a man's mind by humiliation to meet the ignominy of the scaffold, but worse to heed than the scaffold's shame or the scaffold's terrors would be the imputation of having been the agent of French despotism and ambition, and while I have breath, I will call upon my countrymen not to believe me guilty of so foul a crime against their liberties and their happiness. Through you, my lord, sit there a judge, and I stand here a culprit. Yet you are but a man, and I am another. I have a right, therefore, to vindicate my character and motives from the aspersions of calumny. And as a man to whom fame is dearer than life, I will make the last use of that life in rescuing my name and a memory from the afflicting imputation of having been an emissary of France, or seeking her interference in the internal regulation of our affairs. Did I live to see a French army approach this country, I would meet it on the shore with a torch in one hand and a sword in the other. I would receive them all the destruction of war. I would animate my countrymen to immolate them in their very boats. And before our native soil should be polluted by a foreign foe, if they succeeded in landing, I would burn every blade of grass before them, raze every house, contend to the last for every inch of ground, and the last spot on which the hope of freedom should desert me, that spot I would make my grave. What I cannot do, I leave a legacy to my country, because I feel conscious that my death were unprofitable, and all hopes of liberty extinct, the moment a French army obtained a footing in this land. God forbid that I should see my country under the hands of a foreign power. If the French should come as a foreign enemy, oh, my countrymen, meet them on the shore with a torch in one hand, a sword in the other. receive them with all the destruction of war, immolate them in their boats before our native soil shall be polluted by a foreign foe. If they proceed in landing, fight them on the strand, burn every blade of grass before them as they advance, raze every house, and if you are driven to the centre of your country, collect your provisions, your property, your wives and your daughters, form a circle around them, fight while but 2 men are left, and when but one remains, let that man set fire to the pile and release himself and the families of his fallen countrymen from the tyranny of France. My lamp of life is nearly expired. My race is finished. The grave opens to receive me, and I sink into its bosom. All I request then, at parting from the world, is the charity of its silence. Let no man write my epitaph, for as no man who knows my motives dare vindicate them. Let not prejudice or ignorance asperse them. Let them and me repose in obscurity and peace. Amid my tomb remain undescribed, till other times and other men can do justice to my character. Very good, lad. Very great. We'll come back at half 2. We'll go back at 2:30.
So we're going to break for lunch now. We're back at 2:30, but I'd maybe advise jurors, prosecutors and justices not to sort of just keep to yourself, not mingle with other people in the room. Is that okay? Okay, super.
Back at 2:30.
2:30.
Yeah.
So could we please put all our phones on airplane mode
No, I shouldn't know we should have done it.
or silent, one or the other? Thank you.
Good to go. Yeah, excellent. So we'll move on. Next we'll have Teresa reading her affidavit.
Hi, good afternoon. Is this on? So, my name is Teresa Klein. So, I, Teresa Klein, sovereign claimant in Éireann, of Termeel, Bannalee, Longford, aged 18 years and upwards, makes oath and affirm. I make this affidavit from facts within my own knowledge, save where otherwise stated or appearing, so where otherwise stated or appearing I believe same to be true, and accurate in every respect. I say and I believe that Brehon law, otherwise known as Fenchas, holds precedent in Ireland over common law or EU law. Due to the fact that it is an Irish indigenous legal system and is protected not only by the Treaty of Windsor, and owing to the fact that it has never been revoked, any laws enacted which are repugnant to Brehon laws in Ireland are hereby deemed moot and void. I say and I believe that the Papal Bull Laudabiter of 1155 is void, herewith, due to the invasion of any sovereign country by consent of the Papal Bull. Required the consent of the native peoples of Ireland. This required the consent of the Irish kings, the Ree, which I can show did not occur prior to the invasion of 1171. As Henry II invaded Ireland via Waterford and travelled throughout Ireland, obtaining submission from Irish kings, therefore rendering the Papal Bull moot and void. I say and I believe that the invasion of Ireland in 1171 by Henry II was contrary to natural justice, which is the cornerstone of the Brehon legal system, insofar as the office of King, Ree, was elective. This was not brought down in generations. The choice of king was restricted by custom, and in the case of the Ard Ree, which is the High King, the provincial kings, to a narrow circle of Flay called Riag Donna, the members of which were required to undergo a very carefully training, mental and physical. It was therefore, as a rule, confined to the family in possession, of which Henry II was not a family in possession, therefore rendering his claim to lordship of Ireland moot and void again. I say and I believe that the agreement made between Henry II and Diarmaid MacMurdoch was void, as MacMurdoch was a deposed king, who was driven out of Ireland and therefore not qualified to make any agreement on behalf of the Irish people. I say and I believe that the Windsor Treaty of 1175 between Rory O'Connor, who was the last High King of Ireland, to have the power to enter into any agreements on behalf of the Irish peoples, and Henry II of England recognised the legitimacy of native law and order under the Windsor Treaty of 1175. We have a copy of the Windsor Treaty there if anybody would like to read it. I say and I believe that Brehon laws are laws of natural justice, the three rocks to which lawful behaviour is tied: monastery, lord and kin, which is set out and set forth in the Shenkos Mór and the Book of Asil. The validity of Brehon laws are also set out in the Magna Carta Hibernia of 1216, which states that the city of Dublin shall have all of its ancient liberties and free customs, furthering the proof that Brehon laws were legally protected in Ireland. I say and believe the validity of the Brehon laws in Ireland has not been revoked and are still valid and have been used in the near past in the Irish courts as evidence that it is the true supreme law of Ireland and de facto law of the land of Ireland. I offer as proof to back up my statement the following. In 1612, the Constable of Dublin Castle was consulting Brehon manuscripts to determine land boundaries, whilst in 1606 the Lord Chancellor himself summoned a senior Brehon lawyer to resolve a legal dispute. The Brehon law maxim of defasted cert ocus delete, or the confirmation of right and law, was used in the near past case of Moore and others versus the Attorney General and Moore Attorney General 1929. If you see this date and the Moore Attorney General 1934, you can see from this date that this case was used in precedent after the establishment of the Irish Free State. So therefore, precedent keeps Brehon law going. I say and believe that the first rudimentary draft constitution produced by the Constitution Committee in 1922 provided for the continuance of the established system of law, Article X, of which the first rough draft provided for the continuance of existing laws subject to compatibility with the Constitution. Similar provisions were enacted in Article 73 of the 1922 Constitution and Article 50 of the 1937 Constitution. I say and believe that the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius, a Catholic response, the following text considers and repudiates illegitimate concepts and principles used by Europeans to justify the seizure of land previously held by indigenous peoples, and often identify the terms of the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius deems the 1155 papal bull Laudabiter, issued by Pope Adrian V, which gave permission to King Henry II to invade Ireland with the intention of subjugating her peoples ab initio. Therefore, based on the above submissions, I conclude that the Laudabiter, the Crown of Ireland Act 1542 and the Act of Union 1800 have no lawful standing in the sovereign territory of Éireann because of Brehon laws which supersede and revoke any and all laws which are repugnant to the sovereign territory of Éireann.
Open to the jury test questions and the affidavits.
So jury, you're open to ask questions, you can, if you feel. No questions?
Yeah.
Do you want to step up to the microphone maybe, or? No. No?
Oh, sorry. To John D. Flanagan, Section 3. Michael Collins transferred power to the sovereign government of 1919 that was usurped on the 6th to the 12th, 2021 by the Crown. And the authority and the powers written in the foundation documents of 1919 reverted to the IRB as stated in them documents. That's correct?
Yes.
Acts and seals you refer to would be repugnant to the Creator as they are as they would be to the foundation documents of the state, these acts and seals that these people are operating under. That's correct?
Yes, I believe that the remaining seal that the Crown might claim to act under would be the Great Seal of Northern Ireland.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand. Alien governments, does this include those that are operating on this island of Éire as the Provisional Government of Ireland, Company Limited and Stormont?
Absolutely. Any government that's a corporation is an alien government.
Yes, thanks. Natural law is under the Creator, and our sovereignty comes from the Creator. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Number 11. The instruments you refer to, they're unnatural, therefore go against the Creator, the instruments that they're operating under.
That is correct.
So, to Melissa Kelly, Section 10. The Primate of Ireland refused to attend the Synod. Therefore, in a lawful sense, does that not make it null and void?
Yes, absolutely.
36. There is no record of these bulls anywhere.
No.
The bulls that you're talking about.
No.
So this is all fiction, is it?
Yeah,
Right.
I believe so, yeah.
Would it be true to say that the existing laws would have been Brehon law, and these laws were ignored?
Yes, most definitely.
Regans in excelsis excommunicated all who obeyed Queen Elizabeth I's orders. Anybody who didn't obey her orders basically was they were just so that means
Everybody who did obey her after she I think the reason for it was when she killed Mary, Queen of Scots, she was excommunicated for regicide, and anybody who continued to follow her as a lawful queen was also excommunicated from the Catholic Church.
Thanks for clarifying that. The title King of Ireland was not recognised by the majority, which was what Europe's Catholic monarchies and the papacy were, basically.
Yeah.
So it wasn't recognised by these people.
No.
It wasn't recognised. Am I right there?
Yeah.
Okay. The papal bull, Inter Caetera, 1493, the law of... is that the law of nations? Am I understanding
It's
that
the
right?
foundation of the law of nations. Yes, it's
Foundation.
the foundation of international law.
So that's valid.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And it has been used in this papal bull has been used as a justification for the property rights in America and for the colonization of America. So the fact that it wasn't considered valid in Ireland and it is still considered valid in America is quite an interesting quagmire for them.
Yeah, okay, no, thanks for that. The Crown and the Vatican opening their records, have they been asked to do this?
This, what I cited, the Ireland and the Pope, Stephen McCormick, he was a prominent Catholic scholar, and he went over to the Vatican in 1889.
Oh, so they actually did do this?
Yeah,
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. No, it's just and there was only I didn't get the chance, but like when you said the Brehon law, I'm sorry,
Teresa,
I beg your pardon. When you said that the Brehon law was used in Ireland after the formation of the Free State,
yes,
that makes that law in this country. So
it's a continuance.
yeah,
So it's supreme. So it was there before.
Yeah.
So and the fact that they had used it as precedent
Yeah.
in a case after the foundation of the Free State,
Yeah.
that basically means that they have given a credence and agree that it is
So that's
superior.
like the claim. The claim is still there.
The claim is still there.
Okay, that's grand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry.
Teresa, my question is about the Brehon law. So
Okay.
it still stands.
It is. It has never officially been revoked. There is no documentation. We do know that certain British laws came about to ensure that its destruction, but they were never adhered to.
So as a sovereign woman of Éireann, can I live by the Brehon laws?
You can, obviously, alongside what we have right now, until we get to that position
Yeah,
where we can choose.
yeah. But it's still relevant? and
Yes.
Still,
You can use it in
There.
precedent,
okay.
and you can use it in defence in any court cases as well.
Can I say something on the IRB have still, people into the Brehon law, and if you go to England, you see our sovereign seal up in the Royal Courts of Justice. You can have your case heard in Britain under Brehon law.
Well,
Still, yeah, you can.
can we have it heard in Brehon law here?
And those young people that have been
Personal
initiated into the Brehon law by the IRB. We did it in Carnahala some years ago,
Okay.
and we got a lot of people very interested again in Brehon law. But it's a shame that, what's happening. One thing I would like to ask you, there's no execution in Brehon law, is that?
No, well, no, there are certain circumstances there actually is.
And that's why that's so important. It's 13 strings, and if you count, those that last string, if you see the way those dots are, they're on the seals, 32 on our seals. But you see those dots on each of those strings, but the last one hasn't got a dot, and they're over the forecourts, and that is 12 strings. But there is one, because they said that Brehon law didn't have any execution, and that's why it was brought in as a 13 string, and 13 is betrayal, the Judas, and the execution.
Executions were possible for treason, high treason.
Treason, and that's why that is there. That's treason.
Treason.
So, and it's still valid today that a politician, a judge, somebody or a civil servant can be still indicted for treason. And we have kept that alive all this time,
Thank you.
Just for any particular reason there was something in your document that was wrong or misspelled or something,
Probably, yeah.
it can be changed
Yes,
at a later date.
yeah.
I might jump in at that. Is that you're talking about a typo, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah, or
Yeah.
that can be signed. That can be just signed by myself, witnessed by yourself that there's a typo.
Sorry, are you talking about these affidavits and
Yes.
these documents?
Yeah.
Yes, so under the Constitution, the updated Constitution of the Sovereign Dáil Éireann Courts, it provides for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you do, if I can say something. The people that were down in the forecourts in 1922, and as you know, Winston Churchill was put in charge of Ireland at that time. And the immediate and terrible war was the threat. And he told Collins at that, Leinster House was set up to partition Ireland for the Crown of England and to set up the 6 counties as a state, a Protestant state for a Protestant people. And if you look at the sovereign constitution, that it cannot be put before a court. And I think it was the 28th of June 1922, Britain insisted on an election. It split the IRB in two because it says quite clearly sovereignty is inalienable. It cannot be changed by anybody, and it cannot be put before an electorate. And then on the I think it was the 28th of June, off the top of my head, that they were forced to vote for a free state, and that was totally illegal. And the point of the whole issue is that Winston Churchill told Collins, now those people that were in the forecourts, coming among the Fine in the Éireann, and all the Irish volunteers, and they were protecting the 1918 32 county election by the will and wish of all the people. And here you had a vote that split the IRB in two for the Free State. Leinster House was bought to partition Ireland into 26 and 6 counties, and the 26 counties was to give their allegiance to the Crown of England. That doesn't, with the sovereign constitution by the will and wish. But Winston Churchill, he told Collins, Lloyd George, immediate and terrible war if they didn't sign it. And Collins appealed to Winston Churchill that, these were all their friends and allies in the forecourts. and protecting the 1918 32 county election. That's what we still do. That's what you do on the 21st of January at the Mansion House. And if you go to Vaughan's Hotel, 29 Parnell Square in Granby Row, that's where it was. And he said, look, these are all our friends and that. We couldn't turn. And he said the Free State Army doesn't know how to use the guns you sent over, the ammunition you sent over, and the explosives. So he sent over the Crown Forces. They got out of their the Crown Forces uniforms, and they got into the Free State uniforms, and they blew down the forecourts. That's what caused the Civil War here. And why aren't we told that? You know, and that was to pay for Britain's war debts and war pensions. The sovereign Dáil Éireann government was elected by a 32 county, all Ireland, will of the people. And it's so important we know the facts. And I had that out today on the map, the official map of the Free State. But that, Collins said it was for 2 years. And it's IRB Sinn Féin, Arthur Griffith founded it. Sinn Féin today, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Provisional Labour, they all came out of IRB Sinn Féin. That was the mandate they were given to found and fund the state, all 32 counties, down the Irish Sea. And I had that letter from Boris Johnson. He couldn't put a border in the 32 counties. And right down to United States of America. We're probably the wealthiest country in Europe and the poorest people. That has to be reversed. And if you haven't your sovereignty, you can be enslaved. And these corporations, we've seen them today, all they do is put up the price of electricity, the price of gas, and they don't care about the people. If you have a sovereign government, they couldn't do that, because the sovereign people would have to be asked, what can you afford? And it's for the right and welfare of the sovereign people, and the IRB have always claimed that, and that's what we do.
Hi, it's good.
Any more questions?
Would we right in saying we've never had sovereignty,
We always had sovereignty.
or we've never claimed it?
We did. The 1918 32 county election, the first and second Dáil Éireanns were sovereign, and that was in the Mansion House. But Dáil Éireann has never sat in Leinster House. Michael Collins went down with the Free State government. They bought Leinster House from the Royal Dublin Society to impose that Free State, 26 and 6 counties, provisional government, and I said the 6 counties, a Protestant state for a Protestant. It's been a disaster for Britain, for England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and King Charles doesn't have sovereignty. The Queen didn't have sovereignty. It's royalty they had, and that was talking about Henry VIII. If you have sovereignty, you go into another country. You respect the sovereignty of that state, the sovereignty of their government, the sovereignty of their law, the sovereignty of the people and their assets. Henry VIII didn't do that. He changed the monarchy into a corporation. It's the largest corporation in the world, and that's where we have the problems today. They don't care about people. All as you're there from your birth certificate to your baptismal certificate in the Vatican is to pay for your taxes to make them wealthy. It has nothing to do with you. They don't care about you. And I think that's what the world is in trouble today. And I have said about our sovereignty. And King Charles, he has to have the permission from England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales. That's when we were all together. And that Leofold stone, they call it the Stone of Destiny, or the Jacob stone, that was brought in 558 BC by Jeremiah. He's buried up in Loughcrew in Meath. And that stone, all our kings were anointed on that stone. And it was taken to Scotland, and it was taken down to Britain. And this is where they claim we have 1,000 years of our sovereignty. And General de Gaulle, he wouldn't allow Britain into Europe because they didn't have sovereignty. It's royalty they have. Royalty is man-made. Sovereignty comes from God. And you put your 2 hands up in the air, you face the sun and the moon, and you put that, you were born, there's the harp sign. You were born in the image of God. And that's what we do. We don't understand God, but we understand his nature and his land that we live in and the food that we get. and that's the rivers, lakes, and all the fish. Everything that's alive is sovereign, and that's what you look after. And that's the sovereignty of God and the sovereignty of mankind. That's what you do, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. We don't do that anymore. The corporation, the monarchy in Britain is the biggest corporation in the world, and Henry VIII, he went into all those countries and he robbed and plundered them. And that's what you're seeing today. Those assets are yours, and for your children and your grandchildren, and to look after planet Earth. There's plenty here, and those are ancestors who went out and fought in 1916, going right back to the Young Irelanders and right back. It was all about sovereignty. If you haven't got sovereignty, you can be enslaved, and you see it today. You see those corporations are enslaving the people. Families, they must be in terrible trouble trying to rear their families for the state, and this is the sovereign republic. You have to have a passport. That's all comes from the 1918 32 county election, and that's why it's so important that we're all here today. And it's wonderful for me to see everybody here today, and the IRB still alive, and that's where our sovereignty comes from, and that's what they gave us. That you would continue that on and give it to your children. The right and welfare of our people. You can go any place in the world with your passport, you know, and you can go any place in the world and be respected and respect the sovereignty of God and the sovereignty of mankind. And everybody has entitled to that. And there's the sovereign seal on your passport. And everybody should know. Look, and it has to have air underneath it, as is in the sovereign Dáil codes. It's very simple what they did. But I think in the world today, and that Jeremiah, his prophecies, we're seeing them every day about flooding, about fires, about people starving. Because as corporations, they couldn't care less. And that's a corporation, government on the 6th of December 1921, to pay for Britain's war debts and war pensions. What are we paying for Britain's war debts and war pensions for? We have the largest territory in Europe, and the most valuable territory in Europe, and the poorest people. It's time that they were told the truth about what's happened, and stand up for your rights and stand up for your children's rights. And that's all we're saying. All we want is accountability, and we know we have to have corporations, but they have to be held accountable to the people, and that's what we need.
Very good. Yes, Martha.
The registered letters that were sent to Italy and England,
Yes.
Dublin, the paperwork that you've given to us shows that they were received in the country,
Yes.
but not been signed for them. Have you seen signatures for them? Were they ever actually given into those offices, and did somebody sign for them?
Yes, it should be in the book of evidence. There's a tracking document showing it arriving in the country, in Italy and in the UK. Yeah, but there is also a receipt of it being received at the Apostolic Chapel and at Buckingham Palace.
No,
but if it's not there,
They
forgive
stopped
me.
that received in the country, but yeah.
So, yeah,
What's
sorry
your
if it's
feeling?
not
That's
there,
all right.
but
That's all right.
apologies for that. But yes is the answer anyway.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. All good with questions? Yeah, okay, because of course we have to move to the important part of the day. So if I can just quickly summarise, yes, and as Billy said, it's time to stop the plundering of the corporations on this sovereign territory of Éireann. So Teresa presented evidence to you all that the Brehon laws are the ancient laws of the land and that they cannot be usurped, and even with the imposition of the legal system still recognises the Brehon laws. Melissa here gave an abundance of information in relation to all that has transpired since 1155, provided significant evidence that suggests that the papal bull of 1155 didn't actually exist at all. And then she went into great detail to show that if it did exist, it's illegal. I myself presented simple evidence that, notwithstanding any and all that, which I fully agree with and support with, what occurred on the 21st of January 1919 just wiped that clean. and that those documents are as lawful today as they were on the 21st of January 1919. So I say to you, good people of the jury, that we have presented evidence to you that gives you decision-making material in relation to the unlawfulness of the Papal Bull Laudabilitor, the Kingdom of Ireland Act, and the Act of Union, together with any and all purported laws, acts, statutes and seals associated with those instruments. It's up to you. It's up to you to decide. They either are unlawful or they're not. It's your decision. To the honest justices on my left, I say to you that we, on behalf of the IRB, have presented the evidence and conducted the management of this court within the parameters of the Constitution of the Sovereign Dáil courts. So I ask you to take that into consideration with whatever verdict that the jurors do come back with. And thank you all very much. Yeah. Actually, one last point, just in case that any of you might think that they don't matter, these acts, and I think, Melissa, you gave evidence to the fact that the Crown of Ireland Act was repealed, or attempted to be repealed in 1962, I think. But this is from an article from the Irish People on the 16th of February 2022, which refers to the repealing in 1962 of the Crown of Ireland Act, which left in 3 very strange lines, and I quote, "This Act," which is the repeal, "shall not affect any existing principle or rule of law or equity, or any established jurisdiction, form, or course of pleading, practice, or procedure, notwithstanding that it may have been in any manner derived from, affirmed, or recognised in any enactment hereby repealed." I might read that again. "This Act shall not affect any existing principle or rule of law or equity, or any established jurisdiction, form or course of pleading, practice or procedure, notwithstanding that it may have been in any manner derived from, affirmed or recognised by any enactment hereby repealed." That to me suggests that it was never repealed. That's it. So it's, as Billy said, it's the same old lies, deception, obfuscation. So that is why we have brought to the people's attention these 3 particular instruments to put them to bed once and for all. Yeah. Thanks. So, John will lead you to the deliberation room for you to.
Wait for. Or
No, you're
start?
fine. No, you're
Yeah,
just
okay.
right.
Thank you. Yeah. Bring us. Ding thing on it here.
They're just going to hold it at the table over here.
As long as it doesn't rain.
So, thank you very much to the jury and to everyone who has spoken today, and the affidavits and the register of the court, and as well to the Irish Republican Brotherhood and President Billy Maguire and all of you here. So the verdict in the Sovereign Dáil Éireann Courts on Circuit, case record number 22-11-11. In the matter of the Irish Republican Brotherhood versus the Papal Bull Laudator 1155 and the Crown of Ireland Act 1542 and the Act of Union 1801. And this court, being satisfied of the case being managed in adherence to the rules and procedures of the Constitution of the Dáil Éireann Courts, and the courts being presented with the decision of the jury, this court does hereby declare by order, and on behalf of my co-justices, declare by order the Papal Bull Laudator of 1155 is unlawful and unenforceable against the sovereign territory of Éire and the people of Ireland. And the Crown of Ireland Act of 1542 is unlawful and unenforceable against the sovereign territory of Éire and the people of Ireland. And the Act of Union of 1801 is unlawful and unenforceable against the sovereign territory of Éire and the people of Ireland. Sealed by the Dáil Éireann Courts the 11th of November 2022 Parish Court Justice Deborah, District Court Justice Elaine, Supreme Court Justice Josephine Dolores. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well done, yay! Lots of best places there to make that
John, I have that to say. We do that. No, you know it's up. Yeah, I know. Because it just.
Thank you.
Where's Eileen? Edward or Eileen?
Chief
Justice, God bless.
Just before we finish up, guys, Dolores just has a couple of more words to say.
Yeah, so I just, on behalf of everybody in the IRB, we just wanted to thank everyone for coming, but also we just wanted to acknowledge that really none of us would be here today if President of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, William or Billy Maguire, hadn't actually... And just to say that many of you may not know that Billy often used to come on his own on the 21st of January every year, just on the train, and come up and actually commemorate the historic Independence Day. And that I suppose Billy has done the turning of the sovereign seal, and he has kept the history and the knowledge and passed it on to multiple generations. And also we just wanted to have a reflection on his dear colleague who has sadly passed away, John Robinson, who has stood by Billy. And we just commemorate John Robinson, but just maybe have 1 minute silence to reflect, and then we will finish off today. And maybe just to remember the last time we were together in Askeaton, John Robinson was there, and he was absolutely delighted with the re-emergence of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. So just thank you all for coming, and a special thanks to President Billy Maguire. And a song there for John. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming.